Prologue. 1916, Catherine Peartree smiled as she straightened her white leather gloves. They paired perfectly with her brown riding pants and fitted blouse. She strode down the spiral staircase of the grand Victorian home she shared with her parents and younger brother, Curtis. She found Curtis in the kitchen, snacking on a handful of almonds. "I'm going for a ride. Would you like to join me?" Catherine asked. Curtis shook his head. "Father is going to show me how to operate Big Red today." Catherine laughed. "I don't understand why you want to spend all your time working, Curtis. You're only 13. You have another year or two before you need to join the business full-time." Curtis grinned. "Someone has to take over the Peartree business eventually. You're too busy with your horses to learn the ropes." "You're so responsible," Catherine teased. "You should try letting loose once in a while." "I'll take that under advisement," Curtis responded. Despite their frequent banter, the siblings, only a year apart in age, loved each other fiercely. Catherine ruffled Curtis's hair before he could object and strolled out to the entry. "Darling, be sure to wear your hat." Louisa Peartree clucked from behind a pile of boxes. "You'll catch a cold." "What is all of this, Mother?" Catherine asked, delicately stepping around the boxes. "I baked some cookies for the men in the factory," Louisa beamed. "I thought I'd take it to them as a surprise, since they've been working overtime for the big shipment." Barton, Catherine's father, was known as the premier furniture maker in the country. A major holiday order had been placed from overseas, and Barton and his men were working round the clock to make sure everything was ready in time. "That's sweet, Mother. I'll see you later," Catherine called as she continued for the door. "Don't forget your hat," Louisa shouted. Catherine waved her hand. "It's not that cold, Mother. I'll be back before dinner." Outside, the crisp Boston chill forced Catherine to pull her coat a little tighter. She rode away from the Peartree family's estate and toward the open fields outside of the city. Catherine loved riding. She rode nearly every day, and she didn't know what she would do without her horse, Cherry Blossom, and the big barn on the Peartree's property. One day soon, she knew she'd have to marry and move to a different place. She just hoped her future home would have stables in it. Catherine spent hours leisurely working her way through the countryside. She stopped at a stream to allow Cherry Blossom to drink some water. Finally, as sunset neared, she ventured back toward the city. As Catherine and Cherry Blossom picked their way back home, a terrible scent wafted through the fields. Catherine sniffed the air. "Is that burning?" Catherine asked out loud. Cherry Blossom just snorted. Catherine gathered the reins and dug her heels into Cherry Blossom's side, racing toward town. She had a dreadful feeling someone was hurt and needed help. As the town came into view, Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she saw billowing smoke pouring from one of the buildings. Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the building. It was the Peartree Furniture Factory. Chapter 1. 1919, Catherine wiped the side of her face. A streak of black grease appeared on her hand, and she rubbed it on her skirt. No matter how hard she tried, she hadn't felt truly clean in years. After the family business had gone up in smoke, claiming the lives of her father, mother, and brother, the bank had called in on a loan her father had taken out. Penniless, Catherine had to begin working at a local textile factory. Sometimes she dreamed about life back on her family's estate even though she knew it was pointless. She had no prospects for the future, no one would want to marry her. She would continue to work, hoping to earn enough money to put food on the table, and grow old alone. "Back to work," the foreman called. Catherine tucked her sooty handkerchief back in her pocket and returned to her sewing machine. She settled back into the routine of work. At least she had a job, she mused. She couldn't imagine being cast off into the streets. She didn't understand how her parents' money had evaporated so quickly. Something about debtors and credits, that was all she had been told. Catherine lost herself in her work so completely that she didn't realize Mrs. Thatcher was standing in front of her. A robust woman with a twinkle in her eye, she waved a silk handkerchief back and forth in front of Catherine's face. "Excuse me," Catherine said, embarrassed. Hello, Mrs. Thatcher. The wife of the foreman treated Catherine and the other girls who worked in the factory with kindness and respect. I need a word with this one, Mrs. Thatcher told her husband authoritatively. Walter Thatcher frowned but nodded. Catherine looked up at Mrs. Thatcher, questioning her hearing. You need a word with me? What could the dignified foreman's wife want with her in the middle of a workday? Mrs. Thatcher merely smiled. She turned around, and Catherine stood up and followed her into a small office, covered in papers. Mrs. Thatcher looked Catherine up and down. Yes. I think you'll do quite nicely. The older woman made a note on one of her papers. Excuse me, ma'am, what is this about? Catherine felt bewildered. Have I done something wrong? Mrs. Thatcher chuckled. No, my dear. I have an opportunity for you. For me? Catherine could scarcely believe her ears. Mrs. Thatcher nodded. I have a dear friend in Texas. I know her from my days in Seattle. You lived in Seattle? Catherine asked. She didn't know how this had anything to do with her. Mrs. Thatcher was a busy woman, and she did not like to waste time. It was a long time ago. How would you like to be matched with a young suitor from Texas? Catherine blinked. Excuse me, ma'am? My friend is starting a mail-order matchmaking business. I understand from my husband that you have excellent manners and that you seem to be well-raised. There's a young gentleman in Texas looking for a wife, and I think you might be just right. Mrs. Thatcher looked at her watch. If you agree, we'll have to hurry, but there's a train you can catch. And if you disagree, well, it's back to the factory floor. Catherine took a deep breath. What Mrs. Thatcher was offering her seemed impossible. The chance to get married. Perhaps to even start a family of her own. It was something Catherine hadn't even allowed herself to dream about since the deaths of her parents and brother. On the other hand, she didn't know a single thing about her prospective husband. What if he was ill-tempered or cruel? She also didn't know anything about Texas. Was it foolish to travel to a faraway place she had never been before? She didn't know a soul in the state. Then again, she reflected, she didn't really know anyone in Massachusetts either. Since the fire, all of her parents' so-called friends had ignored her, treating her like she didn't exist. Well? Mrs. Thatcher asked, looking at the clock again. Catherine nodded slowly. Yes, Mrs. Thatcher. I'll do it. Chapter 2. Edna Petunia. You have a visitor. Cletus Sanders held from the entry to the large house. Edna Petunia slowly ambled to the front of the house. I'm not expecting anyone. Well, he's here anyway. Cletus shouted. Abner patted his ears as he waited on the porch. It was true that they had a large and spacious home, but was shouting really necessary? Oh, Abner. That's right. I knew you were coming. Edna Petunia smiled as she opened the door to let him in. I thought you said you weren't expecting company, Cletus pointed out. Hush, old man, Edna Petunia commanded. Who are you calling old, woman? Cletus barked back. He leaned closer to Edna Petunia and grabbed her around the waist. I'm calling you old sack. Edna Petunia swatted him playfully. Abner sighed. He wished to someday have the love that Edna Petunia and Cletus shared. Edna Petunia remembered Abner was present and motioned for him to follow her into the informal parlor. Remind me, why are you here again? Abner scratched his head. You said to meet you here after work. Oh. Yes. Don't move. Edna Petunia rushed out of the parlor. A few moments later, she returned waving a letter. I have news. Abner felt his heart skip a beat. You do? What kind of news? Is it good? Edna Petunia opened the letter and scanned it again. She had already read through it twice, but she wanted to get it right. Your mail-order bride is a young woman named Catherine Peartree. She'll be arriving by train tomorrow evening. Abner's jaw dropped. He had never expected Edna Petunia's plan to work so quickly. You mean? I'm going to have a wife. Tomorrow evening? Edna Petunia nodded. That's right. Are you scared of your wedding night? Don't be nervous. It's highly enjoyable. It's not that. Abner insisted. I just didn't know it was going to happen so quickly. If you need advice, you can just ask Cletus, Edna Petunia chuckled. Trust me, he's very skilled in his relations, if you know what I mean. Abner swallowed. As much as he wanted what Edna Petunia and Cletus had, he didn't care to think too much about what happened between them in private. His head spun as he realized that in less than 2 days' time, he would have a woman living in his house. I need to get home. Abner blurted. Edna Petunia smiled. You know where to find us if you need any help. Abner rushed back to his house, his heart aflutter with excitement and apprehension. The small, one-room house he had inherited from his parents had seen better days. He wondered what his new bride would think when she saw the place. It needed a fresh coat of paint, but there wasn't enough time for that. Abner went into the pantry. As a bachelor, he didn't often cook elaborate meals for himself. He had a few cans of beans and not much else. He looked at the clock. If he hurried, he would have just enough time to stop in the Mercantile before it closed for the evening. Abner rode swiftly to the Mercantile and tied his horse to the post out front. He ran into the store so quickly that the door slammed shut behind him. Easy, there, Abner, Louis Darcy, the owner of the Mercantile, called in a friendly tone. What brings you in today? Abner sighed. I need help. Ruby Darcy, Louis's wife and one of Edna Petunia's adopted daughters, walked through with a broom. She often kept the store clean and helped out while raising the Darcy children. What do you need help with, Abner? Remember, all of my sisters are already married. Abner had tried to date nearly every one of Edna Petunia and Cletus Sanders' 15 adopted daughters. It was annoying at first, but by the time the youngest, Katie, married, the entire family felt sorry for Abner. Abner took a deep breath. Edna Petunia has found me a bride. She's coming tomorrow. Ruby stifled laughter. Her adoptive mother continued to surprise her. Edna Petunia found you a bride? How? She's in the mail. Abner said excitedly as he began to race through the aisles. Louis and Ruby exchanged a look. Abner was acting even more strangely than usual. They followed him down one of the aisles. What exactly are you looking for? Louis asked. And what do you mean, she's in the mail? Ruby added. Abner grabbed cans of meat and vegetables from the shelves and tried to balance them. I need food. I don't know what women eat. Ruby found a basket for Abner to use. Abner. Slow down. What on earth are you talking about? Abner tried to calm down. He placed the cans in the basket. Edna Petunia found me a wife, a mail-order bride from Massachusetts, he said proudly. Ah, Louis replied. This is starting to make more sense. And she's coming here tomorrow. I don't have any food for a woman. Do women eat the same 3 meals as men? Abner asked, looking uncomfortable. Ruby sighed. Yes, Abner. Of course they do. But you should stock up on some of the basics. You don't know if she has any particular fondness for certain recipes or preparations. You should talk to her about what she likes. Don't assume that you know. Abner hung his head. There's so much I have to learn. Louis clapped Abner on the back. It will all work out, Abner. It will be a little challenging at first. All marriages are. Ruby elbowed Louis in the side. What are you talking about? I was a perfect bride. Louis grinned. That's true. I just needed a little training to be the husband you needed. That I'll accept, Ruby smiled. She turned back to Abner. He still looked worried. One step at a time, Abner. Abner swallowed. I just thought of something. Do women sleep at night? Ruby sighed. This poor woman from Massachusetts had no idea what she was getting herself into. Chapter 3. Catherine adjusted her bonnet again, checking her reflection in the window of the bus. She could hardly remember what day it was. She had traveled by train from Boston to Chicago. In a cloud of dust, she had boarded a bus that had taken her into Austin. Now, she was on the final leg of her journey. A second bus was pulling into the town of nowhere. When Mrs. Thatcher had told her the name of the town where she was to live, Catherine had second thoughts. What kind of name was nowhere? But then she had remembered that this was her only escape from a dreary life working in a factory. As the bus drove into town, Catherine closed her eyes and pictured her future husband. In her mind, he was tall, dark, and handsome. He'd be broad-shouldered and strong, but also intelligent and considerate. The perfect gentleman. Catherine sighed as she pictured a beautiful life together. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt. "Nowhere," the driver shouted. Catherine opened her eyes and looked around. She didn't see anyone on the street who seemed like he could be her husband. "If this is your stop, you need to get off the bus now," the bus driver called, sounding angry. Catherine gathered her carpet bag and rushed toward the front of the bus, catching her coat on one of the seats. As she stopped to untangle it, the bus driver sighed loudly. Catherine looked up at him. "I'm doing my best." The bus driver muttered something under his breath. Catherine finished untangling the coat and carefully walked forward to the front of the bus. No sooner had she stepped onto the ground did the bus pull away, casting a cloud of dust in Catherine's face. She began to cough loudly. When the dust settled, a man with kind eyes and a rakish smile leaned closer. "Miss Peartree?" Catherine?" Catherine tried to collect herself. "Yes, that's right. Who are you?" "I'm Abner Phelps, miss." I'm to be your husband." Abner scratched his head. He already felt nervous, second-guessing every word in front of his bride-to-be. There was no denying that Catherine Peartree was stunningly beautiful. But at the moment, she looked as if she were going to be ill. "Are you all right?" Catherine coughed. "I wasn't expecting all that dust." The bus driver was rather rude. "He was rude to you?" "That's horrible." Abner felt his face heating up just thinking about someone treating Catherine with disrespect. "Here, do you need this?" He offered Catherine his handkerchief, feeling like that was a very chivalrous thing to do. Catherine accepted it gratefully, then wrinkled her face in disgust. "Is this used?" Abner's face turned bright red. He took the handkerchief back and stuffed it in his pocket, unsure what to say. Micah Barton cleared his throat, feeling sorry for Abner. "I'm Pastor Barton, Catherine." "You can call me Micah." Catherine nodded politely. "Pleased to meet you, Pastor. Would you like an opportunity to freshen up before the ceremony?" Micah offered. Catherine nodded slowly. "Yes, that would be nice." "I'll show you the way," Micah said. "I'll carry that," Abner shouted, lunging forward to grab Catherine's carpet bag. Instead, he tripped over Catherine's skirt, nearly taking her down with him. Catherine gasped and stood up tall, straightening her skirt. "I am so sorry, miss." Catherine," Abner said. Micah steered the trunk away from him. "Abner, let me handle this. Why don't you just chat with your intended?" Abner shot Micah an appreciative look. The pastor was a kind and humble man. Abner was glad he was the person who would be performing the marriage ceremony. Abner tried to think of something Catherine would be interested in on the walk toward the church. All he could think about was the odd look on her face. He had a feeling that things weren't working out very well. Finally, he thought of a question he could ask. "What's your family like? Do they all live in Massachusetts?" A troubled look passed over Catherine's face. "My family was killed in a terrible fire a few years ago. I'm the only one left." Abner immediately regretted asking the question. Now he was truly at a loss for words. "My parents are dead, too," he finally blurted, uncomfortable with silence. Catherine shook her head. This young man seemed to have no manners whatsoever. How could they possibly be married? They had nothing in common. Micah attempted to help out. Catherine, I've heard Boston is beautiful at this time of year. Is that right? Catherine smiled brightly for the first time since stepping off the bus. Yes, I love to take walks by the harbor. The sea breeze is positively delightful. She wondered if she should say anything about her days riding through the countryside on horseback. She wasn't sure if it was very ladylike, but considering Abner's lack of manners, it probably didn't matter. It's even better on horseback. You like horses? Micah asked. Catherine nodded. Well, we have plenty of those around here. Here we are. Micah opened the front door to the church and gestured for Catherine to step inside. Abner followed quickly after, trailing Catherine like a lovesick puppy dog. Micah hoped things would work out between the two of them. A beautiful young woman greeted Catherine with a huge smile and a bouquet of flowers. I'm Chrissy. It's a pleasure to meet you. Catherine felt her spirits lift. That's so kind of you. Thank you. You're welcome. I'm going to be a witness to your ceremony since my mother is busy with my younger brothers and sisters, Chrissy explained. This is my daughter, Micah beamed proudly. Let me show you where you can wash your face and have a moment to yourself. Chrissy took Catherine's arm and led her into the living quarters attached to the church. Abner exhaled loudly and plopped down onto one of the church pews. Do you think she likes me? Micah cringed. He didn't want to lie to Abner, but he also didn't want to hurt the man's feelings. She's probably exhausted from her travel. It may take a few days for you to get used to one another. Abner nodded. That makes sense. Boy, isn't she pretty, Pastor? Micah shook his head. I'm a married man, Abner, and soon you will be, too. You'll soon learn that it's not good form to speak of a woman's looks unless she's your wife. Abner shook his head wearily. I have a lot to learn. Micah smiled. Don't worry too much. I'm sure things will work out. Abner sighed. I hope so. After a few minutes, Chrissy and Catherine joined the men. Catherine had a white flower tucked delicately behind her ear. You look beautiful, Abner whispered. Catherine simply looked down at the floor. Micah looked Abner in the eyes and then turned his gaze to Catherine. Are you ready? Abner nodded eagerly. A moment later, Catherine bobbed her head as well. Today we are gathered in this church to declare the love between Abner Phelps and Catherine Peartree. Marriage is a sacred bond between two people, and Abner and Catherine will not enter into this bond lightly. Do you, Abner, take this woman, Catherine, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Yes. I do. Abner cried. Catherine rubbed her ear and took a step back. Micah continued. Do you, Catherine, take this man, Abner, to be your husband? Catherine hesitated. She wasn't sure about anything. She was exhausted, confused, and a little annoyed. But she quickly realized she didn't have a choice. I do. Micah smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Congratulations. Abner grinned from ear to ear and leaned in close to Catherine. He brushed his lips against hers gently. Catherine kissed him back tentatively. She felt stiff in Abner's arms. He didn't think she seemed like she was enjoying herself. But before he could think too much about it, Catherine was pulling back from him and clutching him. Abner took her delicate hand in his. He had a wife. Chrissy rushed up to Catherine and Abner. You're married now. I'm so happy for you too. Thank you, Catherine replied. Thanks, Chrissy. Abner beamed from ear to ear. Finally, all of his dreams had come true. Catherine felt the weariness from her travels catch up with her. I think I need to sit down, she said, swaying. Micah and Abner grabbed hold of her arms and held her steady. Poor dear, you must be exhausted. Abner, take her home at once. Chrissy commanded. She was a great deal younger than Abner, but she obviously knew the man would obey. Micah chuckled. I'm sure you can tell where she gets that from, he commented to Abner. His wife, Sarah Jane, was quite particular. She often told other people what to do. Although Sarah Jane and Micah had adopted Chrissy, the young woman clearly took after both of her adoptive parents. Abner looked at Catherine, concerned. "Are you feeling all right? I'll take you home, and you can get some rest." "Thank you," Catherine said gratefully. She told herself that she was just tired, and in a few hours, she would probably come to her senses and realize Abner was a wonderful husband. Right now, though, it was hard to see past his odd manners. All she wanted to do was sleep. Abner racked his brain for things to talk about as they exited the church. They bid goodbye to Micah and Chrissy and started to walk toward Abner's house. Abner dragged Catherine's trunk behind him, and Catherine followed, walking slowly. "It's not too far." Catherine nodded. She wasn't sure how much longer her eyes would stay open. As they walked, she thought of dozens of questions for Abner, but she was so drained that she couldn't bring herself to ask any of them. They walked in silence until they came to a small, rustic home. "Here we are," Abner announced proudly. "Home sweet home." Catherine tried to force herself to smile. "I need to get some rest." "Of course." Abner set her trunk aside and opened the front door for her. Catherine stepped inside. It was dark, and she couldn't see much, but there would be plenty of time for that later. Abner led her into the bedroom. Catherine saw that a thin blue blanket had been stretched on top of the bed, not quite covering it. It didn't look very comfortable, but Catherine was just grateful to be somewhere she could rest. "I just need a few hours of sleep," she mumbled. Abner stood watching her, unsure what to say or do. "A little privacy?" Catherine asked. Abner swallowed. "Yes, of course." He left the room, pulling the curtain closed. He had only known his bride for less than an hour, and things were already off to a rocky start. He slumped down in one of his armchairs in the living room. What was he going to do? When Catherine woke up, she panicked, not remembering where she was. The room was still dim, and she couldn't see a thing. She stumbled toward the curtain, yawning. As she opened it, letting some light in, the events of the past few days came rushing back to her. She was a married woman now. Catherine looked around the room, finally able to see. Clothes were stuffed under the bed, and the wardrobe was overflowing. There was an inch of dust on the floor and even more on the doorframe. She frowned. What type of household did her new husband keep? She tentatively walked outside the small room and into the living area. Abner sat at the kitchen table, an eager look on his face. "Are you hungry?" "You slept for 10 hours straight." Catherine gasped. She looked out the windows and realized that the light she saw was from the morning sun. She also noticed it was raining. "I didn't realize I was asleep for that long." "You must think me very impolite." Abner shook his head. "Not at all. You were tired. But, I had to sleep, too. So I stayed out here. I didn't want to startle you." Abner pointed to the sofa. Catherine saw another thin blanket on top of it. Despite her unease, she was touched. It was sweet of Abner to allow her to sleep peacefully without interruption. Abner coughed. "I don't know if you normally eat breakfast, but..." Catherine saw that Abner had set 2 bowls out on the table. She couldn't tell what was inside them, but it looked like a thick, brown slop. She tried not to grimace. "Yes, I'd love to." Abner grinned. He stood and pulled out a seat for Catherine to sit down in. Catherine took a small bit of the slop on her spoon and sniffed at it. "What exactly is it?" "A Phelps family recipe," Abner explained. "We call it Musco." "Is that a family name?" Catherine inquired politely as she swallowed her first bite. "No. It stands for everything in the icebox must go." Abner chuckled. Catherine nearly gagged on the porridge-like substance. It tasted awful, but she didn't want to be rude. "I think from now on, I'll handle the cooking around here." Abner's eyes widened. "Oh, that would be wonderful. I'd really like that." Catherine smiled. There was one thing they already agreed on. That was progress, wasn't it? Suddenly, Catherine felt tiny pinpricks on her head and shoulders. She shrieked and stood up. Abner hopped out of his seat and grabbed a pot from the cupboard. He stuck it underneath where Catherine had been sitting, then moved her chair over a bit. "Sorry about that, here you go." He took his seat again and began eating his porridge. Catherine stared in horror at the water dripping into the large pot. "Why is water coming into your house?" Abner paused between bites. "Leaky roof. It only leaks about half of the time." "You mean, this has happened before and you haven't fixed it?" Catherine asked in disbelief. Abner shrugged. "I'll get to it eventually." "How long has this been going on for?" Catherine sighed. Abner thought about it for a moment. "Maybe 2 or 3 years? I can't remember." He happily returned to his food, shoveling spoonfuls of it into his mouth. Catherine mimicked wiping her mouth off with a napkin, but Abner didn't seem to understand. Streaks of food covered his upper lip and chin. Catherine shook her head in dismay. She couldn't believe how dreadful his table manners were. "I think I'll start unpacking," Catherine told Abner. Abner looked at Catherine's bowl. She had barely had anything to eat. Maybe women really didn't eat breakfast after all. "Aren't you still hungry?" Catherine shook her head. "Not at the moment." After watching Abner scarf down his food, she had lost her appetite completely. Not that the food had been particularly appealing to begin with. Abner followed Catherine into the bedroom, where Catherine opened her trunk and began shaking out her clothes and refolding them. "I need to go to work. Will you be all right here by yourself?" "Yes, of course," Catherine told him. She actually looked forward to the chance to be alone with her thoughts. The past few days had been chaotic and stressful, and she wanted to take time to absorb it all. Abner nodded, looking a little sad. "I'll miss you while I'm at work," he said with a lovesick expression. Catherine put her hand over her mouth to hide her smile. He really did seem like a sweet man. She hoped she'd be able to teach him some basic housekeeping skills. Abner leaned in to kiss Catherine, but she turned her cheek instinctively. Abner turned away so she couldn't see his face. "Goodbye," Abner called as he raced out the door. Catherine breathed a sigh of relief once he had gone. She was grateful to be out of the factory, but life in Texas was nothing like she had expected. For one thing, the house was a mess. For another, Abner seemed to have no social grace or manners. And finally, she was all alone in an unfamiliar place. She didn't have a soul to talk to or confide in. She wanted to sit and cry, but what good would that do? She took a deep breath, stuck her chin out, and got to work. She was going to be the best wife she could possibly be. Chapter 4. Abner found it difficult to focus on his work as a ranch hand. Thoughts of Catherine filled his mind and distracted him from anything he tried to concentrate on. She seemed beautiful and kind, but there was something about her behavior that was bothering him. "What's bothering you, Ub?" Felix, Abner's best friend, asked as they stacked bales of hay in the barn. Abner sighed. "I don't think I'm a very good husband." Felix stopped working. "What did you just say?" "I'm not a very good husband," Abner repeated mournfully. "Why do you care about being a husband? You're a bachelor." Felix laughed. "That's not true." "I'm married," Abner told his friend. "What are you talking about?" Felix couldn't believe his ears. Abner was the most single man he knew. He was always trying to court one young woman or another. Felix wasn't sure how he had convinced so many of the women of nowhere to go out with him. Abner explained how Edna Petunia had arranged for his mail-order marriage. "And now she probably hates me," he finished glumly. Felix ran his hands through his hair. "That sounds tough. But I'm sure the two of you will figure it out. Does Edna Petunia know her very well?" Abner shook his head. "Catherine came from Massachusetts. She doesn't know anyone in town. Except me." Felix clapped Abner on the back. "Cheer up. You have what you've always wanted. It can't be that bad." Abner nodded. "I'm sure you're right." The work passed slowly, and as each hour went by, Abner worried more and more about Catherine. He wondered if he had bought enough groceries for her to cook with. "Ready for lunch?" Felix asked. The two men usually ate together outside in the shade of the magnolia trees. Abner frowned. "I forgot to pack my lunch today. I reckon I should go home and see if Catherine's doing all right. I'll see you after lunch." "Okay. Good luck." Felix waved goodbye to Abner. Abner raced toward his house. When he got there, he found Catherine in the kitchen. She seemed much happier than she had been earlier that day. Catherine smiled. "Would you like lunch? I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made 2 types of sandwiches. Do you prefer ham or tuna?" Abner beamed. "I like both. If I had to pick, I guess I'd say ham." "Great." Catherine placed the sandwich, cut into dainty quarters, onto a plate. Abner examined the plate. It was the family dishware, but it was sparkling. "Did you clean this?" Catherine nodded vigorously. "Oh, I washed everything. This house needed a thorough cleaning." Abner hung his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry I didn't have things prepared for you." Catherine's heart melted. "It's all right, Abner. You didn't know." Abner grinned. "This looks delicious." He took a big bite of his sandwich, accidentally smearing a dollop of mayonnaise on his nose. He chewed his food noisily, mouth hanging open. Catherine tried to be delicate. "Abner, when you were younger, did you ever attend any special classes?" "What type of special classes?" More mayonnaise dripped onto Abner's chin. "For things like etiquette. Manners, social customs, that sort of thing," Catherine said, recalling her own education at a Boston preparatory school. Surely Texas had the same type of course. Abner swung his head back and forth. "I don't recall anything like that. We had reading, writing, and arithmetic, though." Abner smiled at his new wife. He wondered what she was getting at. Catherine sighed. "That's what I was afraid of." "What's wrong, darling?" Abner asked. He loved calling her his darling. "It's nothing," Catherine said, glancing at the floor. She stood up and brought a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Here, I made these, too." Abner whistled. "You had time to do all this while I was at work?" Catherine shrugged. "Cookies and sandwiches are easy. Mrs. Phillips taught me when I was a girl." "Who's Mrs. Phillips?" Abner asked. "She was our cook when I was young," Catherine explained. Abner's brow furrowed. "You had a cook?" "Of course. Didn't you?" Catherine set the tray on the counter and began packing the cookies into a small jar. "No, we didn't. My mother did all those things for our family," Abner replied. He glanced up at the clock on the wall. "Looks like I should head back to work." "Have a good afternoon." "I'm going to keep cleaning," Catherine told him. "Thank you, darling." Abner gazed longingly at his new wife. He wanted desperately to pinch Catherine's bottom. She was his wife, after all, but something held him back. He settled for a quick kiss on the cheek and raced out the door back to the farm. Catherine exhaled as soon as Abner had gone. She was doing her best to be polite, and she was truly beginning to care for him, but she was exhausted. She had been on her hands and knees scrubbing for most of the morning, and the house still had plenty of work for her to do. Still, Catherine reflected, she was glad she wasn't working at the factory. At least with Abner, she could build a future. Even though it might require some initial work, she was willing to do her best to shape him into the husband she wanted. Yes, Catherine thought, that's just what I'll do. I'll make him into the man of my dreams. With this new idea, Catherine began to see possibilities all over the house. She cut fresh flowers from the overgrown garden outside and placed them around the house in glasses filled with water. She found a few bolts of fabric and fashioned them into makeshift curtains. It added a certain element of class to the home. Though it was small, it was starting to look respectable. Catherine sighed as she stepped over the pot in the kitchen. Fortunately, it had stopped raining, but she had no idea how to patch a leaky roof. It was a task she had to leave to Abner, though. She didn't mind getting her hands dirty, but she was not willing to expose herself to the indignity of climbing a ladder onto the roof. She decided to start a list of things he would need to do to make the house habitable. She put fixing the roof at the top. The pantry wasn't bare, but it didn't contain many foods Catherine knew how to prepare. Ever since the fire, she had lived alone and had learned to make simple meals for dinner. But she longed for the days when Mrs. Phillips kept the pantry stocked with all of the ingredients for her and her brother's favorite meals. She decided to ask Abner if she could help him purchase groceries the next time he went to the mercantile. She looked at the array of cans and tinned meats before her. Nothing looked particularly appealing, but she would figure out a way to make do. She wondered what kinds of foods Abner liked to eat. As she remembered how eagerly he had eaten his odd porridge for breakfast, she realized that anything she made could only be an improvement over his cooking. The afternoon passed quickly. Catherine dusted every surface she could think of, folded and put away her belongings, and washed Abner's dirty clothes that she found strewn about the house. When Abner got home, he couldn't believe what a difference Catherine had already made in his home. "It looks wonderful in here." Catherine smiled. "Thank you. I hope you don't mind." She tried not to grimace as Abner stomped around the house in his work boots, tracking mud throughout the freshly scrubbed floors. At least she would have something to keep her busy tomorrow. "Of course I don't mind," Abner said earnestly. "This home is yours now, as well as mine. I want you to be comfortable here. I made a casserole for dinner." Catherine set a pan on the table. Abner admired the casserole. He was starving. Catherine had also placed a variety of plates, bowls, spoons, and forks on the table. He frowned as he sat down. "Are we expecting someone else for dinner?" "No, we're not," Catherine replied. "Why do you ask?" Abner wrinkled his brow as he pointed to the extra forks and plates. "There are so many forks, I thought this couldn't possibly be for the two of us." Catherine thought about that for a minute. "Your mother didn't set the table this way when you were a boy?" "No, she just put out the utensils we needed." Catherine brought out a salad in a bowl. She served some onto one of the plates for Abner, then served herself. She sat down and picked up one of the smaller forks on the table and began to eat. Abner began to eat as well. Catherine coughed as she saw that Abner wasn't using his salad fork. Was this another one of his jokes? Catherine wasn't used to having a man's company. During the years she worked at the factory, she lived in a meager room and took all her meals alone. "Are you all right?" Abner asked, concerned that Catherine was choking. "I'm fine," Catherine said. She picked up her salad fork and waved it as a reminder. Abner smiled. Catherine clearly had a humorous side as well. He waved his fork in the air. Then he picked up his spoon and did the same. But Catherine only looked confused. Abner felt awful. "What's wrong?" "I'm sorry if I did something wrong." She shook her head. "It's nothing. I'm overreacting." "What is it, Catherine?" "You can tell me anything." "I'm your husband," Abner declared. He wanted her to trust him. Catherine didn't think she should tell him. "It's silly." Abner stopped eating. He thought it was serious, because of the look on her face. "You can tell me." "You're eating your salad with the wrong fork," Catherine said. She looked as if it really bothered her. Abner stood up and walked over to her. He patted her on the shoulder awkwardly. "I'm sorry. I'll eat with the right fork." "Show me which one to use." Catherine managed a smile. "Thank you, Abner. I shouldn't be upset about the fork." Abner was seriously confused. "Then why are you upset?" Catherine looked up at Abner. "Honestly, I'm not sure." "Well, why don't we finish our dinner?" Abner suggested. "It's going to get cold, and I don't want to waste such a delicious-looking meal." Catherine pursed her lips. "Yes, let's finish. I spent a long time cooking, and there's no reason for everything to be spoiled because I'm being silly." She picked up her fork again, and made sure he knew which one to use as she finished her salad. Abner sighed. Was he ever going to understand his wife? He sat back down and carefully used the right fork to finish his salad. When he finished, he began eating the casserole. It tasted just as delicious as it looked. Is it all right if I get more? He asked. Catherine nodded, pleased he was enjoying her cooking. As soon as she finished, she did the dishes and said she was going to lie down. She slipped into the bedroom and closed the curtain behind her. Abner didn't like the idea that he and his wife were not sleeping in the same bed yet. He knew that it was his right if he wanted to do so, but something else told him to take some time and allow Catherine to adjust to her new surroundings. Abner wondered if there was anything he could do to make Catherine comfortable in their home. Perhaps there were more decorations she could put up that would suit her taste more than his sparse furniture. He paced and paced, unsure of what to do. He wished his mother were still alive so he could ask her what to do. She would understand a woman's wants and needs. Abner was perplexed by Catherine, but hopefully that would soon change. They were married, and soon, he hoped they'd start acting like it. After hours of indecision, Abner finally decided to sleep on the couch again. He tossed and turned throughout the night, feeling sorry for how upset Catherine had been at dinner. Abner rose at the dawn's first light and prepared his own breakfast. He snuck out of the house quietly, not wanting to wake Catherine. He had a stop to make before work. Abner approached the large house and hoped he wasn't about to disturb the owners. He knocked on the door tentatively. No one answered, so he knocked a little louder. He waited. Just as he began to knock again, the door opened, and Cletus Sanders, wearing a robe and slippers, glared at him. It's far too early for this nonsense, Abner. Our girls are all married. Go away. Abner shook his head. It's not that, sir. I need to speak to Edna Petunia. Cletus growled. She's spoken for, too. Abner blushed. That's not what I meant, sir. It's about my wife. The mail-order bride that Edna Petunia sent for. Cletus scowled. I'll see if she'll come down. Did you have to come here at this hour? Abner nodded earnestly. It was the only thing I could think of. Cletus's expression softened. Wait here. A few minutes later, Edna Petunia stomped down the stairs. Abner. It's too early, she complained. What do you want? I need your help, Abner pleaded. Catherine doesn't seem happy here. I don't know what to do. Edna Petunia sighed. I'll put on some tea. Sit down in the parlor. Abner went into the informal parlor while Edna Petunia boiled water for tea. He fidgeted as he waited. When the tea was ready, Edna Petunia brought in 2 cups with saucers and set one in front of Abner. Tell me everything. Abner's words came out in a hurried jumble. Catherine doesn't seem happy. She was upset at dinner. She said it was because I didn't eat with the right fork, and I don't even know what she was talking about. She was so upset, and now I'm upset, and we're not sleeping in the same bed, and I sure want to sleep in the same bed, but she keeps going to bed without me. And I don't know what to do. Edna Petunia held up her hand. Slow down. One thing at a time. Abner didn't know where to begin. I'm worried Catherine's going to leave me. Edna Petunia frowned. No, my friend Mrs. Thatcher wouldn't send me a girl who would run off on her husband. Not after you took your marriage vows. She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a peppermint stick, offering it to him. Abner took the peppermint stick, feeling a little relieved to hear that. But I don't think she's happy with me. Why do you think that? Edna Petunia asked. She seems to cry a lot. And we haven't, had marital relations yet, Abner admitted. Edna Petunia scoffed. You must be joking, Abner. You 2 youngsters haven't played hide the pickle yet? Despite the situation, Abner nearly chuckled at Edna Petunia's question. He had never known a woman of Edna Petunia's age to be so forthcoming about what happened between a husband and wife. Then he remembered what they were talking about and shook his head sadly. She hasn't outright rejected me. But she's gone to bed early 2 nights in a row. I didn't want to disturb her, so I've been sleeping on the sofa. Edna Petunia shook her head in disbelief. Well, Abner, that's your problem right there. To truly become man and wife you need to have some special private time together. If you don't have that, your marriage is in trouble. I thought you said I didn't have anything to worry about because Catherine's a respectable woman. Abner protested. That was before you told me you haven't shared the marital bed yet, Edna Petunia countered. Well, how am I supposed to do that if she'll barely even talk to me? Abner was at a loss. Was his situation hopeless? What kinds of things does she like? Edna Petunia asked. Abner shrugged. I don't know. I think she likes flowers, because she put them around the house. That's a start, Edna Petunia said. Bring her flowers daily. Maybe chocolates, too. Sometimes that gets a woman in an amorous mood. I can do that. Abner said, starting to cheer up a little. Find out what other things she likes, Edna Petunia instructed. If you make her more comfortable, she'll open up to you more. And treat her with respect. Truly listen to what she's telling you. What if I don't understand what she's telling me? Abner thought about the salad fork conversation. He still didn't understand what Catherine had been so upset about. Just try your hardest. Edna Petunia waved her hand. And one more thing. Abner leaned in. What's that? You are not to wake me or my husband up at this hour ever again. Edna Petunia shouted, then threw her head back and laughed. Abner joined in, even though he wasn't sure if she was joking or not. Yes, ma'am. You can see yourself out, Edna Petunia said. I need to get back to my husband. We were in the middle of some private business when you came knocking on our door. Edna Petunia winked at Abner, and he blushed. Abner walked to the door and let himself out of the house. He tried to remember Edna Petunia's advice. He needed to find something that Catherine liked. Flowers would be a good start, but what else could he get for her that would make her feel at home? At work, Abner was silent for most of the day. Instead of going home for lunch, he went into town and stopped at the Mercantile. He found Louis Darcy at the counter. Louis smiled at Abner. How is married life treating you, Abner? Abner sighed. Not very well, I'm afraid. What's wrong? Louis asked. I need to make Catherine feel more comfortable in our house. I was hoping to buy her some nice things she might like, Abner explained. I see, Louis said. I think this might be something that Ruby could help with more than I could. Wait down here and I'll get her. Louis disappeared into the stairwell. A few moments later, Ruby came downstairs. Abner. Louis told me you needed my help. Abner nodded gratefully. Yes, I'll take any help I can get. Let's see. I think you should start with a necklace. Any new bride would be thrilled with a nice piece of jewelry, Ruby advised. She pointed to a dainty chain of pearls. What about this one? That's a good idea, Abner agreed. Do you know if she likes sweets? Ruby asked. Abner shook his head dolefully. I don't know. I haven't asked. Perhaps you could bring her some ice cream after work. If you hurry, it won't melt on your way home, Ruby suggested. That's a great idea, Abner replied. What else? It might help for Catherine to meet some other young women of her age. She seems like she's close in age to Katie, Ruby said, mentioning her youngest sister. She was recently married, too, so they'll be able to relate to one another. That's a terrific idea. Abner began to cheer up. Surely having friends in nowhere would improve Catherine's mood. Good. I think that's a good start for now, don't you? Ruby soothed. She felt sorry for Abner. He was clearly trying his best. And the poor man didn't have any sisters or a mother around to guide him. Yes. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you so much, Ruby. Abner said, thankful for the advice. He paid for the necklace and waited as Ruby carefully wrapped it in a small box. Then he hurried back to work, tucking the jewelry box in his pocket. Abner thought of Catherine as he worked. He hoped she liked the necklace and would be surprised. He wondered what she would make for dinner that evening. There was no doubt that she was an incredible cook. He just hoped that tonight, unlike the previous day, she'd eat something. Abner hurried home after work. On his path, he found some zinnias that looked stunning. He picked a bunch of them and rushed back to the house. Catherine was in the kitchen when he arrived. "Hello. I'm home." Catherine looked up and did her best to smile. It had been a long day of cooking and cleaning, and she was exhausted. No matter how hard she tried, it seemed like there was another part of the house that was dusty or messy. Abner walked over to Catherine and presented the zinnias and a small box to her. "These are for you." Catherine was touched. She found a glass for the flowers and put water in it so they would keep. Then she opened the box and pulled out a delicate pearl necklace. "Thank you, Abner. This is beautiful. And the flowers are lovely. Would you like to put it on?" Abner asked eagerly. "Right now?" Catherine laughed. She felt underdressed in her apron and a house skirt. "Well, why not?" Abner shrugged. "Okay," Catherine agreed. She lifted her hair, allowing Abner to clasp the necklace. As Abner touched her skin, she felt a tingling sensation run through her body. Startled, she stepped forward and let her hair down again. Abner grinned. He was happy to have done something right for a change. He clapped his hands together. "It smells wonderful in here. What have you been cooking?" Catherine smiled. "It's a surprise." Abner was impressed. "Wow. I can't wait to find out what it is." "Well, you'll have to wait a little longer. I have a few finishing touches to prepare." "Can you wait in the bedroom?" Catherine asked. "I suppose so." Abner felt confused, but did as he was told. In the bedroom, he was amazed to see that all of his clothes had been picked up, washed, and folded. The bedroom looked like a completely different space. Everything was in order, neat and tidy. Catherine had even found a different set of blankets for the bed so that it was completely covered. Abner didn't know how she had found the time to do all that and cook meals for him. He was a lucky man. Still, being in the bedroom also made him uneasy because of what it represented. This was his first time in his bedroom in 3 days. If he and Catherine were to have a healthy marriage, he had to stay in here with her. But he didn't know how to bring it up. He knew she was trying, but he still felt like he couldn't speak plainly with her. He had no idea how she really felt about him. Abner gulped and realized he had to talk to Catherine that evening. He would tell her that he had to sleep in the bedroom with her that night. It was his right, and it was about time. There would be no more sleeping on the sofa. Abner sat down on the bed and leaned back. All the stress had drained his energy. Maybe he would take a quick nap before dinner. The next thing Abner knew, Catherine was calling his name. He sat up with a start. "Come in." He rubbed his eyes. Catherine wiggled the curtains a little. "Dinner is ready." Abner frowned. "You can come in the bedroom. You don't have to stay outside." He didn't like that his wife behaved so formally around him. Catherine opened the curtains, blushing. "I was worried you wanted some private time. I didn't want to interrupt." Abner sighed. "What's for dinner?" He had enjoyed a deep, relaxing sleep. Now that he was awake, he felt tired and rather cranky. Catherine went back to the stove and waved her hands with a flourish. "It's my mother's beef Wellington. It's always been my favorite dish." Abner scowled. "What's beef Wellington?" Catherine seemed at a loss for words. "Why don't you try it? It was one of my favorites when I was little. My mother didn't cook often, because Mrs. Phillips handled that. But when she did, my brother and I always asked for this." Abner grunted as Catherine served him a plate of hot food. The dinner she had cooked seemed to be meat wrapped inside a loaf of bread. It was also smothered in a mushroom sauce, and Abner hated mushrooms. "I hate mushrooms," Abner said without thinking. Catherine's face fell. She had worked for hours to make the dish, doing everything she could to remember how her mother had made it. Although it was her first time making it on her own, she thought it smelled delicious. Abner saw Catherine's expression and scrambled to say something else. "I didn't mean that. I'm sure it will be wonderful." Catherine could tell that Abner didn't mean it, though. "If you don't want it, you don't have to eat it. I'm happy to eat every bite myself." She served herself a generous portion before looking at him to see if he was going to ask for some. Abner felt terrible. He hadn't meant to upset Catherine. That was the last thing he wanted to do. "I'd like some as well, please." They ate their dinner in silence, and then Catherine did the dishes, before excusing herself and going into the bedroom again. Abner stared at the closed curtain for a moment and decided it was high time he confronted his new wife about the way she ran off if she got the slightest bit upset. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked. "I don't know what I want," Catherine said, frustrated. "What about what I want?" Abner demanded. "Have you thought about that?" Catherine sat up, wiping her tears away. "What do you mean? You haven't shared our marital bed at all yet." "Do you know how that makes me feel?" Abner asked. Catherine grew very quiet. "Rotten. That's how it makes me feel." Abner continued. "I'm a man, and a man has the right to sleep next to his wife. And, well, you know what I mean." Catherine looked at him, trying to blink the tears away from her eyes before he noticed them. She knew exactly what Abner meant. She, too, wanted to have a healthy and happy marriage. She knew what that entailed. But the past few days had been overwhelming. She wanted a little time to get settled and feel comfortable before she could open herself up to her husband like that. She didn't know how to express it to Abner. All she wanted to do was cry. "I need to take a walk," Abner said. He pushed aside the curtains and walked out the front door, to the house. "Well, now I've gone and bungled everything." Abner was upset with Catherine, but he was even madder with himself. Regardless of their disputes, Catherine was his wife, and it was his duty to love and protect her. He felt guilty for losing his temper with her. He walked around the house, calming himself down. When he went back inside, he planned to apologize, but he found Catherine shoving her belongings back into her carpet bag. "What are you doing?" "I need to get away and think," Catherine explained. "I can't be here anymore." She knew leaving forever wasn't the answer, but taking some time to think and figure out how to be a better wife might be. Abner was stunned. A wife couldn't just quit after 3 days and walk out on her husband, could she? "Please don't do that, Catherine." Catherine kept packing. "I've had a lot of change all at once. I need some quiet so I can do some thinking." Abner sighed. He couldn't believe what he was about to say. He walked over to her and put his hand on top of her carpet bag, preventing her from putting anything else inside it. "Don't go, I understand. I'll stay with my employer for a few days and give you some time to think." Catherine paused. She felt angry with Abner for his behavior, but what he was offering seemed kind and generous. "You would do that?" "I want this marriage to work, Catherine. I know we haven't gotten off on the right foot, but I hope we can figure things out soon," Abner continued. Catherine nodded. "I'd like that. I hope so, too." Abner took a sack from the kitchen and packed some clothes into it. "I'll come back in a few days to check on you. If you need to see me, I'll be at the ranch." "Okay." Even though Catherine wanted to be alone, she hated to see him leaving. "Abner, wait." Abner paused before he opened the door. "What is it?" Maybe you should come back for dinner each night. So we can check in on one another," Catherine suggested. Abner brightened. "I'd like that. You know I love your cooking." Catherine blushed. "Okay. I'll see you tomorrow evening, then." "See you tomorrow." Abner exited the cabin and set off for the ranch in Bagley. He knew Tom and Penny McLean wouldn't mind an extra man sleeping on the premises. They had a series of cabins on their land where their adopted sons lived, and there were several empty cabins. Abner had never stayed there before, but Tom and Penny were warm and welcoming. Penny happened to be one of Edna Petunia's adopted daughters, and she and Tom stayed busy raising their 7 sons and all the orphan boys they had taken in. When Abner got to the ranch, he saw Tom chopping wood outside with one of his sons. "Abner, what brings you here this time of night?" Tom asked. He set his axe down to greet Abner. Abner sighed. "I'm having trouble with my new wife." "Already?" Tom looked surprised. "It's been less than a week." Abner shook his head. "It seems whatever I do is wrong. I'm sure you two can work things out." "What are you doing here, though?" Tom hoped Abner hadn't come looking for advice. He enjoyed his own wonderful marriage with Penny, but he didn't presume to know a thing about other people's marriages. "I was hoping I could stay here for a few nights, to give Catherine some space. I'll work extra in the mornings in exchange for food and shelter," Abner explained. Tom thought for a moment. "That's fine, Abner. Cabin 6 is open. I'll have Penny make up the bed for you." He motioned for his son to continue chopping without him and led Abner inside. "Hi, Abner," Penny called as soon as she saw him. "How's that new wife of yours? I heard from my niece Chrissy that she's just beautiful." Abner hung his head. "I'm afraid she's not very happy with me now." "Is that right?" Penny asked. Abner nodded. Tom clapped Abner on the back. "He's going to stay with us for a few nights until they patch things up. Can you get cabin 6 ready for him? I forgot to tell you, we've got a new young man in cabin 6, but cabin 9 is open. I'll make the bed there, and Abner, don't worry about a thing," Penny exclaimed. Tom turned to Abner and smiled. "I can't keep track of all the comings and goings around here. You'll understand one day when you have kids." "I hope you're right about that," Abner replied. At this point, he just wanted a healthy marriage. They could worry about expanding their family later, once Abner and Catherine had resolved their issues with each other. Penny cheerfully showed Abner to cabin 9. Each structure was a small, basic room with a twin bed and a chest of drawers to put clothing in. Even though it wasn't anything fancy, it was neat and tidy, and since there wasn't much inside, it felt spacious. Abner waited as Penny made the bed with fresh sheets. "Let us know if you need anything at all. Breakfast is in the bunkhouse, as you know." Penny started to exit the cabin. She turned back around and added, "Oh, and Abner? Get some rest. I'm sure everything will work out." "Thank you, Penny," Abner said gratefully. He was so appreciative of Tom and Penny and everything they'd done for him. After his parents had passed, Penny had made him enough casseroles to last a month. Tom was a good employer, treating all his men fairly. And now they were helping him work through his relationship issues. Abner didn't know many families who would do so much for one of their employees. He climbed into bed and tried to get some rest as Penny had instructed. But all he could think about was Catherine and the terrible argument they'd had. He tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable. Finally, he drifted off to sleep, hoping the next day would be better. Chapter 5. Catherine woke up feeling empty and anxious, like she had forgotten something. She walked around the house slowly, trying to see if she had missed something the night before. Suddenly, the events of the past evening came rushing back. She shuddered as she recalled her and Abner's fight. She thought about what her mother would say if she were there. Surely, her mother wouldn't have approved of the way they had spoken to one another. They were married now, and Catherine knew she had to start acting like it. Still, some things about Abner positively infuriated her. The way he spoke while he chewed, ignored the appropriate silverware, and didn't seem to know what a duster was all confounded Catherine. She didn't think she was asking for much. It was the little things that made a man. Catherine wondered what she would do all day until Abner arrived for dinner. She longed to see other people, but she didn't know anyone in nowhere, and she wasn't sure if it was safe to wander outside alone. She fussed around the house for a while, straightening furniture, dusting, and reorganizing the drawers. When she had finished, she decided that a little fresh air would do her well. She didn't have a key, so she took a ring she'd inherited from her mother with her. It was the only possession she cared about, since it had sentimental value. Just in case anyone robbed the house, they wouldn't find that. Before she left, Catherine changed her mind and also took the necklace Abner had given her. She'd taken it off in a fit of frustration, but now she picked it up and clasped it around her neck. She admired her reflection in the window. It really was lovely. Catherine left the house and shut the door behind her. It closed with a thud. She hoped Abner wouldn't mind that she was leaving it unlocked. In the city, she had always locked her doors, but she had a feeling things were different in Nowhere. Catherine tried to recall the path she and Abner had taken from the church to the Phelps house. If she could retrace her steps, she could explore the small town she had seen when she'd arrived. She also hoped to attend church services there. If she remembered how to get there, she'd have an easier time navigating the way on Sunday. Catherine was amazed by how different the climate in Nowhere was from where she had lived in Boston. Certain things were the same, like the humidity in the air. But where Boston was full of buildings, Nowhere had hills and plains as far as the eye could see. It was much warmer in Nowhere, and she enjoyed that. She tried to follow the exact steps they had taken, and she was pleasantly surprised when she saw the church where she and Abner had been married just a few days earlier. Catherine walked down the main street of Nowhere. She was glad to see a bank, a post office, a customs house, and even a library. She couldn't wait to apply for a card so she could borrow books. As she continued walking, she found two businesses that interested her even more than the others, an ice cream parlor and a mercantile. Catherine decided to leave the ice cream for another day and explore the mercantile. When she walked in, a friendly man greeted her immediately. "Good morning." "Good morning," Catherine replied. "I'm Louis Darcy." "Are you Catherine?" the man asked. Catherine flushed. "Yes, that's me." "How did you know?" Louis grinned. "There aren't many new people in town, and word travels fast. Plus, my mother-in-law's the one who sent for you, my brother-in-law married you, and your husband was here just the other day." "Oh, wow," Catherine said, overwhelmed. "You're related to Pastor Micah?" "My wife, Ruby, is sisters with his wife, Sarah Jane," Louis explained. "How are you adjusting to life in Nowhere?" "It's certainly interesting," Catherine said honestly. Louis chuckled. "That's right, it certainly can be. I hope you're settling in comfortably. Abner's got a nice piece of land he inherited from his folks. The house is a bit small, but I'm sure you'll spruce it up in no time." "I have already begun to do a little decorating," Catherine admitted. "Abner tells me you come from up north?" Louis asked. "That's right," Catherine nodded. "Boston. Must be cold up there," Louis remarked. "My wife and her adopted sisters all came from New York. They all say moving here to Texas was the best thing that ever happened to them. I hope you'll soon say the same thing." A troubled look crossed Catherine's face. Louis felt like he'd said something wrong. "I apologize if I've upset you in any way, Mrs. Phelps." Catherine was distracted by hearing someone call her Mrs. Phelps. It wasn't natural to her, and she didn't feel right about anyone calling her that. "Call me Catherine," she said firmly. Louis looked surprised, but nodded. "Yes, ma'am, Catherine. I truly hope I haven't offended you." Catherine smiled. "You haven't. It's just a lot to get used to, being here and not knowing anyone." "I can imagine that would be very difficult," Louis agreed. "Now, I've certainly pestered you enough with questions. What can I help you find?" Catherine looked around the store. "It looks like you have just about everything here." Louis chuckled. "We do our best to provide what the people of Nowhere need." "I'm not sure, but I will need some groceries, because we're running very low," Catherine explained. "And I see you have some fabric." Her eyes glimmered with excitement. A half hour later, Catherine strolled out of the mercantile, dragging a wagon that contained her purchases. Louis had said she could return it on Sunday when she came into town for church. Catherine couldn't wait to get home and prepare dinner with all of her new ingredients. She had also purchased 3 bolts of fabric to make new curtains with for Abner's house, well, for her and Abner's house. It was hard to get used to the fact that the house belonged to her now as well. By the time Catherine returned to the house, she was exhausted and thirsty. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it quickly. She thought about Abner and wondered how he was doing. It seemed unbelievable to her, but she actually missed his company. Although the house was small, it felt empty without him in it. Catherine pondered what to cook for dinner. She hoped to find something that would really impress him, a dish that would make him ask for seconds. She searched around the house, hoping to find a hint for what types of food Abner enjoyed. She opened each drawer, hunting for some sort of clue. Nestled behind the icebox was a small wooden recipe box. Catherine thought it must have fallen back there some time ago, because it was covered in cobwebs. She picked it up, dusted it off, and opened it. Inside the box were 28 handwritten recipes with the name Alma Phelps. Catherine figured that Alma was probably Abner's mother's name. The recipes listed how to prepare everything from pork chops to bread pudding with detailed quantities. Catherine flipped through the recipes eagerly, searching for one she had all the ingredients for. Finally, Catherine settled on a pot roast. She carefully pulled all of the ingredients out of the pantry and got to work. She couldn't wait until Abner tasted her food. She hoped he would be pleased that she had made the effort to find a family recipe. As Catherine cooked, she also tidied the house. Although it was far cleaner than it had been before she arrived, it was never perfect. She adjusted the furniture several times, wanting everything to be just right. As she waited for the pot roast to finish, she sat down and began to work on the new curtains she planned to put up in the front windows. She loved the new fabric she had purchased at the mercantile. It had been good to get out of the house and talk to someone. She looked forward to meeting some of the other residents of Nowhere, and she hoped Abner would introduce her to his friends. Soon, it was time for Abner to arrive for dinner. Catherine chose her favorite dress to wear. After the accident, nearly all of her belongings, including her clothing, had been taken from her to pay her parents' debts. But she had sneaked a jade green dress in the bottom of a battered carpet bag, and no one had ever asked her about it. Catherine slipped the jade dress on and checked on the pot roast. It was nearly done, just in time. Abner was due in 5 minutes. Catherine waited for the clock to strike the top of the hour so she could pull the roast out of the oven. 5 minutes stretched to 10 and then 20. She took the roast out, angry that it would probably grow cold as she waited for Abner. Where was her husband? After 30 minutes, Catherine wondered if something had happened to him. She wondered if she had misunderstood the time they had agreed to meet. Finally, after 45 minutes of waiting, Abner burst into the cabin, his face bright red with exertion. So sorry, Abner huffed. Ran. Here. Forgot. Catherine took a deep breath, trying not to grow angry. I can't understand what you're saying. Abner caught his breath. I'm so sorry, Catherine. I forgot. You forgot? Catherine couldn't believe Abner's excuse. How could you forget? We agreed to this. Abner looked forlorn. It wasn't that I forgot that we were going to eat dinner together. It was that I lost track of time. As soon as I realized my mistake, I ran all the way here. Abner bent over, still a little out of breath. Catherine shook her head. Are you expecting me to just disregard the fact that you're 45 minutes late? Abner, in future, I'd like you to try to be on time. Abner looked at the pot roast sitting on the table. That looks like a pot roast my mother used to make. That's because I used her recipe, Catherine said softly. Abner stared at Catherine. How is that possible? I don't have any of my mother's recipes. Catherine was nearly too angry to respond, but she lifted the recipe box and held it out to him. They're in here. Oh, my goodness! Abner exclaimed, cradling the recipe box in his hands. Where did you find this? It was behind the icebox. Covered in cobwebs. Catherine wanted to tell him he'd have found it if he'd ever cleaned his house, but she didn't. Trying to be a good wife might just kill her. Sometimes she just wanted to strangle the man. Well, I'm sorry about all that, but I'm so happy you found my mother's recipes. She was a wonderful cook. Now that you have them, you can make all of my favorite dishes, Abner said cheerily. Abner? Catherine frowned. What? Abner asked warily. Do you want me to pretend everything's just fine? Catherine was so upset that tears brimmed in her eyes. She willed herself not to cry in front of Abner again. She wanted him to know that she was tough and unafraid to stand up for herself. Abner considered the question and smiled. Yes, that would be nice. She sighed. Perhaps he was right. If she continually pointed out every little thing he did wrong, they'd never be able to make their marriage work. Sit down, Abner, and we'll have supper. Chapter 6. On Sunday morning, Abner knocked on the front door to his own house. He was still perplexed by female emotions, but he had at least learned to knock and give Catherine advance notice that he had arrived. Catherine came to the door, dressed in her Sunday best. You look beautiful, Abner told her. Catherine looked down at the ground. It's nothing. What are you doing here? I wanted to see if you wanted me to walk you to church, Abner explained. I go every Sunday to the same church where Micah, where Pastor Barton married us, you mean, Catherine said easily. Abner blushed. Yes. Catherine thought about his question. Yes, I'd like that, she agreed. Okay. Abner nodded eagerly and held his arm out. Catherine pushed the door shut behind her and accepted Abner's arm. They walked to church together, politely inquiring about each other's well-being and avoiding any potential conflict. As they continued toward the main street, Abner stiffened and jerked Catherine behind him. Catherine gasped. That hurt. Shoo, Abner cautioned. Catherine was frightened by the look on Abner's face. What is it? Shoo, Abner repeated. He motioned for her not to move. Catherine grew very still. She waited until she thought she was going to topple over. Fortunately, right at that time, Abner took a deep breath and turned to face her. Did you see that rattlesnake? Catherine shook her head, terrified. Rattlesnake? Abner nodded. I didn't want him to even have a chance of getting near you. Catherine took a deep breath. For all of his faults, Abner really could be sweet. Thank you, Abner. Abner glowed with pride. It's my job to protect you, and that's what I'll do. Catherine couldn't help but smile. They continued walking. He really was a good man, despite his lack of manners. A few minutes later, Abner paused. Catherine? His tone was serious. Yes? Catherine hoped they weren't about to get into another argument before church. Would you mind if we kept what's going on between us private? Abner suggested. Oh. Catherine remarked, surprised. I hadn't thought about it. Since I don't know anyone here, there isn't really anyone I would talk to. Nowhere is a small town, Abner continued. It may be prideful, but I don't want anyone to know that now that I'm finally married, I'm having problems with my wife. What do you mean, now that you're finally married? Were you engaged before? Catherine felt her pulse quicken. For some reason, she hated the idea of Abner being promised to another woman. Abner shook his head. Nothing like that. But it's no secret that I tried to court many girls in town. I even took some of them on dates, he admitted. But I didn't feel for anyone what I feel for you. You tried to court many girls? Catherine repeated. I don't like the sound of that. Abner shrugged. I know now that I was wrong to pursue so many women. At the time, I was desperate to start a family. Now, with you, I have a chance. Catherine wasn't sure what she was feeling. Part of her felt sick to her stomach at the thought of Abner going around town, trying to court every girl in sight. Another part of her felt like she and Abner should start fresh. Abner looked at Catherine. Do you agree, though, that we should keep this matter private, just between the two of us? Catherine nodded. Yes, I think that's best. Good, we should get started again. We don't want to be late. Abner offered his hand to Catherine as they began walking again, and after a moment of consideration, Catherine put her hand in his. They walked in silence until the main street came into view. As they approached the church, Abner smiled at her, thankful they'd agreed to keep up appearances. Abner found seats in a pew near the middle of the church. He and Catherine sat down, with plenty of space for other members to fill in around them. Soon, more people crowded into the church, and Penny, Tom, and their 7 sons and assorted ranch hands filled in around them. Abner sighed. The McLeans were the only ones who knew that Abner had been staying on their property instead of in his marital bed. Still, he didn't think they'd bring it up. Edna Petunia and Cletus entered a few moments later, settling into a pew directly behind Abner and Catherine. "Oh, my goodness! This must be Catherine Peartree, the mail-order bride," Edna Petunia said much too loudly for Catherine's taste. Catherine's cheeks flushed. "And you are?" she inquired politely. Edna Petunia looked at Cletus and roared with laughter. "Oh, my, that's the first time someone in this town didn't know who I was." Cletus grinned at Catherine. "It's probably good for her ego to get knocked down a few pegs. I'm Cletus Sanders, and this is my wife, Edna Petunia." The name rang a bell for Catherine, but she couldn't immediately place it. "I'm the one who sent for you," Edna Petunia explained loudly. Catherine looked around. Everyone in the church seemed to be listening to their conversation. She shrank into her seat, embarrassed. "Don't be shy," Edna Petunia boomed. "Let me get a good look at you." To Catherine's dismay, Edna Petunia stood up and grabbed Catherine's hands, pulling the younger woman to her feet. "Spin," Edna Petunia instructed. Mortified, Catherine did a turn the way she had been instructed at her private school for girls back in Massachusetts. "Oh, how beautiful. And look at her manners, Abner. Didn't I do such a good job?" Edna Petunia exclaimed. Abner felt like he was going to die of embarrassment. The McLeans and their workers were all watching the exchange with great interest. He didn't want to admit that he and Catherine were having problems, but he also didn't want to lie, especially in church. Abner thought about what he could say that wouldn't be a fib. "Yes, Edna Petunia. You found me the perfect wife." Catherine blushed, sitting down and wishing she could melt into the pew. She looked to the front of the church. When was service going to get started? She didn't know how much longer she could handle Edna Petunia's cheery scrutiny. But Micah was nowhere in sight. "How are you settling in, Catherine? I heard you had some troubles the first few days," Edna Petunia clucked. Catherine glared at Abner. There was no one else Edna Petunia could have heard that from. He had been the one to say that they needed to keep their issues private, and yet he had talked about their home life with Edna Petunia? The woman obviously had never kept a secret in her life. Abner shrugged, feeling terrible that he'd said anything at all to Edna Petunia. "Yes, everything's just fine now, Edna Petunia," Abner said. Even though it wasn't the truth, Abner did not want to discuss these matters with the whole congregation listening. Tom gave him an odd look, but didn't say anything. Edna Petunia clapped her hands. "Good. Are you enjoying playing in the marital bed then? Have fun now, before the little bastards come." Catherine's jaw dropped, and she covered her mouth in horror. "Excuse me?" She thought for certain she had misheard what Edna Petunia had said. Abner slouched in his pew. This day was getting worse and worse. "You know," Edna Petunia laughed. "Are you having fun having your corn ground?" "I don't understand," Catherine admitted. "Shaking of the sheets?" Edna Petunia continued. Everyone in the church continued to listen to their conversation, even though they pretended not to stare. "Hide the pickle? You probably have a different term for it in Boston." Catherine couldn't believe Edna Petunia was talking about intimate matters so freely in public. Cletus saw the dismay on Catherine's face and patted the young woman's hand. "Don't worry, darling. That's just how Edna Petunia is. She's not shy." "No, I'm not," Edna Petunia agreed and pinched Cletus's bottom. He jumped a little and grinned, kissing her on the nose. Catherine's head spun. Thankfully, Pastor Micah strode to the front of the church to begin the service just then. Catherine was relieved to be out of the spotlight for a change. She enjoyed listening to Micah's calm, soothing voice, and the ritual of being in church. Her family had attended service each Sunday when they were alive, but after they'd passed, she had been unable to get time off to attend church. It was comforting to be back in a place of worship. As everyone prayed, Catherine found her thoughts wandering to her marriage with Abner. She hoped that God would bless their marriage. Although they'd gotten off to a rocky start, Catherine hoped it would all work out. Pastor Micah cleared his throat. "This morning, I wanted to talk a little about marriage." Abner perked up. Occasionally Micah would speak on topics like faith, or family, or caring for the elderly. If Micah had any advice on the subject of marriage, Abner would gladly accept it. "I'd like everyone here today who is married to raise their hand," Micah said. Catherine felt uncomfortable raising her hand, but Abner elbowed her in the side. They both raised their hands. Most of the adults in the church also did. It seemed to Catherine that nowhere was mostly made up of married couples and children. "I've been lucky enough to have been married to my beautiful wife, Sarah Jane, Micah began, gesturing at a stunning woman in the first row. Edna Petunia sneezed loudly, and Catherine couldn't hear anything. "Years, and it has been a privilege to witness our love grow over that time," Micah continued. Catherine strained to hear him, but her ears were still ringing from Edna Petunia's sneeze. She swallowed hard, and her ears adjusted back to normal. "Marriage is a beautiful relationship. It's the way you can start a family and find your life's partner. But it's also hard work. Very hard work. In fact, it's the hardest thing I've ever done." The church laughed, appreciative of Micah's honesty. Catherine couldn't believe that Micah had ever struggled with marriage. He seemed so open and kind, and his wife, Sarah Jane, looked so in love with him. Catherine wasn't sure if she would ever be able to look at Abner that way. Abner was inspired. If Micah and Sarah Jane had ever had problems, maybe what he and Catherine were going through was just a normal part of marriage. Abner hadn't had much experience with relationships, just courting. Maybe this all was to be expected. "I'd like everyone here who is married to hold hands and say a special prayer for your marriage. Also, everyone in this community is here to celebrate and support everyone else's marriage. Together, we are all stronger," Micah finished. Everyone bowed their heads in prayer. Beside Catherine, Abner beamed like he'd just received wonderful news. But Catherine felt more confused than ever. After the service, Edna Petunia picked right up where she had left off. "I truly adore seeing a young couple so in love. I'm such a good matchmaker," she declared. Cletus smiled and patted her on the back. "Yes, you are, dear. Catherine, how often are you two playing in the marital bed? I want to know when I can expect some grand bastards." Edna Petunia continued. "Grand, what?" Catherine asked, startled. They all walked outside of the church and formed a circle so they could keep talking. Edna Petunia laughed. "It's my special term for them. I know Abner's not my son, but since I arranged your marriage, I consider any children you two have to be my own grandbabies." "But why?" Catherine began, unsure of how to ask her question. Micah came up to Catherine and Abner. "Don't bother, Catherine," Micah said with a good-natured smile. "We've all asked Edna Petunia why she calls them that for years, and we still don't completely understand, but it's all in good fun. She means well." "I'm right here, and I can explain myself," Edna Petunia said indignantly. Cletus patted her hand. "We know, dear, we know." Micah turned to Catherine and Abner and spoke in a low voice. "How are you two doing? I was glad to see you here this morning." "Of course," Catherine replied. "Where else would we be on a Sunday?" "I'm glad to hear that," Micah smiled. "Welcome to our congregation." "Thank you," Catherine said. "Please let me know if either of you need to talk about anything. One of my jobs as a pastor is to help our community with anything they're going through." "I know that you've both had some big changes," Micah offered. "I'm here for you any time." "Thank you," Catherine repeated. Abner smiled and shook Micah's hand. "No one has answered my question about grand bastards," Edna Petunia complained. Penny approached the group and put her arm around Catherine protectively. Edna Petunia, they've been married less than a week. Give them a little space. She turned to Catherine. Catherine, I'm Penny. My husband and I own the ranch where Abner works. Catherine's face flushed. So this woman, this stranger, knew about all of her marital troubles. Now she understood why Abner had wanted to keep things private. Penny saw Catherine's discomfort and pulled her away from the crowd. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to introduce myself. And to get you away from Edna Petunia. We love her dearly, but she can be a lot to handle. Catherine relaxed. Thank you, Penny. It's such a relief to have someone to talk to. I am a bit overwhelmed. Penny laughed. Honestly, I'd be worried if you weren't overwhelmed. Catherine giggled, too. It was the first time in a long time she felt comfortable. Although she'd just met Penny, she immediately liked the woman. Now, if you ever need anything at all, we're right over in Bagley. Well, you probably don't know where that is yet, but Abner could show you. I live there with my 7 sons and a variety of young men, mostly orphans, who need a place to stay. We give them shelter and hot meals and help them get back on their feet, Penny explained. When the orphanage in Bagley burned down, we adopted all the boys who lived there. Many of them are still with us, and we've adopted more since. 7 sons? They must keep you busy. Catherine remarked. Oh, they definitely do, Penny chuckled. But I'm always happy to help a friend. So please, come over for dinner any time. We would love to have you. That does sound like fun, Catherine agreed. She hadn't thought about children in a long time, but she would love to meet Penny's boys and get to know them. When she was younger, she had loved playing with the children of her parents' employees. Catherine could always make them laugh. And one day. Catherine was afraid to hope for too much, but she secretly wished that one day, she and Abner would be able to have children of their own. It was something she had once dreamed of, but after her parents died, she hadn't thought it would be possible. Catherine felt better already. Thank you, Penny. Penny squeezed Catherine's hand. Of course. Edna Petunia marched up to Penny and Catherine. Are you two telling secrets? No, Edna Petunia, I was just introducing myself. Penny laughed. Her adopted mother was a force to be reckoned with. I was just telling Cletus that I haven't been to the Phelps house in years. I want to see what you've done with the place, Edna Petunia declared. You do? Catherine felt at a loss for words any time Edna Petunia was involved. Despite the woman's brash temperament, Catherine found herself growing fond of her. But she still had no clue how to respond to her. How about dinner tomorrow night? Edna Petunia asked casually. Catherine looked for Abner in the crowd, but he was engrossed in a conversation with Cletus. She turned to Penny for help, but Penny just shrugged. Not wanting to be impolite, Catherine nodded. Of course. We'd love to have you. Excellent. I can't wait to see you two lovebirds in your home together. Edna Petunia pulled Catherine into a deep embrace. This will be so much fun. Chapter 7. Catherine checked on the simmering sauce, then walked over to Abner. Stop slouching. Abner straightened up. Yes, ma'am. He was trying to follow Catherine's lead, hoping it would make her feel more comfortable. I don't know about the new curtains. Do you think they look too blue? Catherine asked. Abner looked conflicted. Oh, no. Catherine said. You hate the curtains? No. Abner cried. It's not that at all. It's just that. I thought they were blue. They're supposed to be gray. Catherine exclaimed. Edna Petunia will think I have horrible taste. Abner walked over to Catherine. He glanced up at the clock. It was 5:30, and they were expecting Edna Petunia at 6. He put his hands on Catherine's shoulders and gently massaged them. Hey. It's going to be all right. Catherine felt her body relaxing even though her mind felt anxious. This is my first time entertaining anyone as a married woman. I want everything to be perfect. I wonder about that, Abner blurted out before he could stop himself. What are you talking about? Catherine went back over to the sauce, stirring it a little more. Does it matter if everything's perfect? Sometimes life is imperfect, and that's fine by me, Abner said. When things are too perfect, I feel uncomfortable and like I'm not allowed to be myself. Oh, I don't have time to get into this now. Edna Petunia will be here any minute. Catherine exclaimed. A few minutes later, she gasped. Abner? Where are your shoes? Abner scratched his head. They're on my feet, aren't they? No. Catherine pointed to the small mat near the entry to the house. Catherine's 2 pairs of heels were neatly stacked, but none of Abner's shoes were there. Edna Petunia's going to know that you don't stay here at night if your shoes aren't out. Where are they? Abner gulped. My extra pair is back in Bagley. I won't have time to get there and back before she gets here. Oh, no. She's going to know that we're having trouble, Catherine fretted. Why she cared so much about how the older woman felt, she didn't know, but she wanted everything to seem like it was good between her and Abner. I have an idea. Abner picked up Catherine's heels and put them behind the curtain in the makeshift bedroom. Problem solved. If Edna Petunia asks where your shoes are, we'll tell her that in Boston, people keep their shoes underneath their bed. Catherine wrinkled her nose. But that's not true. Abner winked. I know it's not true. But it will keep Edna Petunia from asking too many questions. Oh, Catherine nodded in understanding. I see. Okay, that's fine. She rushed back to her pot of sauce. I hope this turns out all right. Catherine, I'm sure it will be fine, Abner reassured her. The house looked wonderful, and the sauce smelled delicious. As long as Edna Petunia wasn't too eccentric, he knew they would have a terrific time. Then again, it was Edna Petunia they were talking about. Abner took a deep breath. There was something he had been meaning to ask Catherine about. He walked over toward her. Could we talk? Right now? Catherine asked. I'm trying to get ready for Edna Petunia. She felt frantic even though everything was mostly ready. Wasn't she supposed to be rushing around getting everything ready? Catherine, the house is spotless. You've already set the table and prepared for everything. I think you should take a break. Sit down for a minute. I'll watch the sauce, Abner offered. Catherine considered this. My feet are hurting pretty badly, she admitted. Take a break, Abner repeated. Once Catherine had taken a seat, he launched into the speech he had practiced in the mirror at the cabin that morning. Catherine, I want to know if you're serious about this marriage. I love you, and I want to make our relationship work. Do you ever think that I could move back in with you and truly live as husband and wife? Catherine gasped. Abner, we need to talk about this, but does it have to be right now when we're expecting company? Abner pointed to the clock. There's still time before Edna Petunia gets here. Not that much time, Catherine grumbled. Abner felt himself get upset. If we can't talk about it now, when can we talk about it? Every time I bring it up, you change the subject. I need more time, Catherine said. How much time? Abner pressed. I don't know. Catherine put her hands on her head. Why was he asking her all these questions when she needed to be concentrating on Edna Petunia's arrival? I'm not trying to upset you, Abner explained. I'm just trying to figure out what we should do. Catherine threw her hands in the air. I don't know what to do. I don't either, Abner admitted. But if you had to venture a guess. On the stovetop, the sauce began to hiss and sizzle. Catherine jumped up from her chair. Oh, no. You forgot to stir the sauce, it's ruined. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Abner and Catherine froze in terror. Edna Petunia had arrived. Neither of them moved. Outside, Edna Petunia began banging on the door. Hello? Are you home? I thought you invited me over for dinner. More like she invited herself over for dinner, Catherine grumbled, finally springing into action. She pulled the pot off the stovetop and began stirring, hoping to salvage what was left of the sauce. She pulled out little burnt bits with a spoon. "Don't just stand there, Abner, get the door." Abner took a deep breath and went to the door. He forced a cheery smile and opened the door. "Hello, Edna Petunia. Weren't wives supposed to be obedient, not bossy?" Edna Petunia barreled into the small house. My. This house looks spectacular, that's how I know it's seen a woman's touch." Edna Petunia winked at Catherine. As Edna Petunia got closer to the table, she began to cough. "What is that dreadful smell?" Catherine glared at Abner, then smiled sweetly at Edna Petunia. "I'm sorry about that. The sauce cooked a little too long." "That's all right, I'm not picky," Edna Petunia declared. She pulled a hip flask out, unscrewed the lid, and took a big drink from it. "Lucky I have my cough syrup." Catherine nodded. She had never seen cough syrup come in a hip flask before, but she was learning that sometimes you just had to trust Edna Petunia and not question her. She set the sauce aside and pulled out the dinner rolls she had baked that afternoon. She offered the basket to Edna Petunia, who daintily scooped one up with her dinner napkin. Edna Petunia passed the basket to Abner, who pawed around with his hands, before selecting the plumpest roll. "Abner," Catherine hissed, but he simply smiled up at her. Edna Petunia buttered her roll and sank her teeth into it. This is delicious, Abner, you've got yourself a prize wife here." "I know it," Abner agreed, but his face was white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" Edna Petunia demanded. "Are you ill?" "The main course is ready," Catherine exclaimed, trying to distract Edna Petunia. She scooped pasta with tomato sauce and meatballs onto Abner's plate, then Edna Petunia's, and then her own. "This recipe comes from Abner's mother." "That's nice, dear," Edna Petunia remarked. She bit into a meatball. "This is heavenly." "You'd better be careful, or I'll be here for dinner every night of the week." "You're welcome any time," Catherine said graciously. "Any time?" Edna Petunia stroked her chin. "I'll certainly take you up on that." "Well, if you do that, you should probably send notice." "So we know to be ready for you," Abner stammered. "So we can prepare." "Why would you need to prepare for me to come over?" Edna Petunia asked, perplexed. "I'm not fussy." "We know you're not fussy," Abner assured her. "It's just. Sometimes. We would want to know." Catherine sighed. Abner was acting so strange. Edna Petunia would surely figure out their secret. She tried to help. "If we know we have a guest coming, we can put out an extra place setting." "That's all, Edna Petunia." "Hang on a minute." Edna Petunia clapped her hand over her mouth. "You're hiding something, and I know just what it is." Catherine and Abner looked at each other in alarm. "You do?" Abner asked, terrified. As soon as Edna Petunia knew something, the entire town would know shortly after. She didn't mean to gossip, but she was connected to practically everyone. It was only a matter of time. Edna Petunia threw her head back and laughed. Finally, she straightened up and cleared her throat. "You two want to make sure you're not playing hide the pickle when I come over. Don't worry, I won't judge you." The conversation was so absurd that Catherine couldn't help but emit a nervous giggle. Seeing Catherine lose her poise was so adorable that it set Abner off, and soon, the trio was roaring with laughter. "Yes, and we'll leave that subject alone for now," Catherine said. "Are you sure you don't need advice?" Edna Petunia asked. "I've been married for a long time and I'm something of an expert on the subject. You can even ask Cletus about it." Catherine shook her head politely. "I'll take your word for it." "Let me know if you change your mind," Edna Petunia replied. "We surely will," Catherine assured her. "Would you like more broccoli?" Catherine offered, eager to change the topic of conversation. Edna Petunia licked her lips. "Absolutely." Catherine served Edna Petunia a few spoonfuls of the roasted broccoli she had prepared. "You really are a talented cook, Catherine," Edna Petunia complimented. Catherine beamed. Thank you, Edna Petunia. Abner truly is a lucky man, Edna Petunia remarked. Abner grinned. Yes, I am. He tried to grab Catherine's hand, but she didn't notice and kept eating. Abner pulled his hand back. So, which of my bastards have you met? Edna Petunia asked, changing the subject. Catherine tried to get used to Edna Petunia's shocking vocabulary. Do you mean your adopted daughters? That's right, Edna Petunia replied. Each one is different, and now they all have families of their own. Well, Catherine began, looking at Abner for help, I know I've met Penny at church. I've met Ruby's husband at the mercantile, but I haven't spoken to Ruby yet. That's right, I don't think she's met any of the others, Abner confirmed. Edna Petunia set her fork down with a clatter. Well, that's foolish. Abner, what have you been doing? Not introducing your bride to young women around her own age. She'll have a much easier time settling in once she's made friends. Catherine felt an urge to protect Abner. Oh, it's not his fault, Edna Petunia. I've made myself busy by taking on small tasks around the house. Edna Petunia looked around admiringly. You have done a nice job, dear. Thank you. Catherine looked at Abner, and they smiled at one another. You really should get together with one of my girls, though, Edna Petunia continued. It took me time to make friends in nowhere, and I had a head start. What do you mean by that? Catherine asked, curious. She had assumed Edna Petunia had grown up in nowhere, like Abner and most of the others she'd met. I came from Seattle, and I moved here with a good friend of mine, Dr. Iris Harvey. In fact, if you haven't seen her yet, you should make an appointment soon. Need to make sure everything's in order for baby making. Edna Petunia winked at Abner. I didn't know you moved from Seattle, Catherine commented, wanting to steer the conversation away from her childbearing abilities. She enjoyed Edna Petunia's company, but felt uncomfortable discussing such intimate details with anyone. Oh, yes, Edna Petunia replied. I was close friends with Dr. Iris's family. She's the youngest of a family of girls, and she wanted to practice medicine. But no one would hire a woman in Seattle. She moved to nowhere, and I came along with her. I worked for her before I married Cletus. Wow, Catherine remarked, impressed. You must have had a lot of interesting experiences as a doctor's assistant. Oh, yes, Edna Petunia chuckled. The stories I could tell you. Catherine smiled and began to relax. She didn't know why she had worried so much. People in nowhere didn't seem to care as much about manners or etiquette as her parents and their friends in Boston had. They were more relaxed, caring more about connecting and relating to one another. Catherine found that she truly enjoyed the more casual atmosphere. Abner relaxed, too. He was proud that despite their friction, Catherine had served an excellent meal and was such a good hostess to Edna Petunia. Having dinner guests over was something he had never done on his own. They settled into an easy conversation about Edna Petunia's many adopted daughters and their ever-growing number of offspring. And then there's Gertrude. She and her husband own the book wagon, if you've seen that parked around town. Edna Petunia counted her daughters by ticking off fingers. I can't say I've seen that before, Catherine responded. She hadn't spent a lot of time in town, though. Maybe I can come over early tomorrow, before dinner, and we could visit it, Abner said excitedly. Gertrude's husband Jed was a musician in addition to being a bookseller, and Abner always enjoyed his company. Edna Petunia frowned. What do you mean, come over before dinner, Abner? This is your house. Abner gulped. He had been so pleased with how dinner was going that he'd forgotten to keep the secret that he hadn't been living in his own home for the past few days. I meant. Catherine thought quickly. I think what Abner meant was, the house is so different, sometimes he forgets he lives here. Abner looked at his wife gratefully. That's exactly what I meant. Thank you. Edna Petunia remarked, eating another spoonful of pasta. She looked back and forth between Catherine and Abner for a moment before returning to her food with her normal passion for eating. Catherine waited for Edna Petunia to ask them more questions about Abner's comments. She steeled herself, trying to think of answers to anything Edna Petunia might wonder about their relationship. Edna Petunia chewed her food for a long time, then swallowed. "You're a strange one, Abner. I'm glad you found someone who can appreciate you." Abner sighed in relief. "Yes, I am, too. Thank you for arranging it all." "Yes, thank you," Catherine added. She was glad Edna Petunia hadn't pressed the issue. Edna Petunia sat back and smiled. Nothing made her happier than to see two young people in love. She wondered if she should try to make matchmaking a bigger part of her life. "I'm so pleased to see the two of you doing so well. I should leave before I've overstayed my welcome. After all, you two are newlyweds." She winked at Catherine. "I'm sure this one isn't giving you any rest at all." Catherine blushed, still uncomfortable with Edna Petunia's forthright manner. "I suppose you could say that." Abner had enjoyed the visit, but he was worried that the longer Edna Petunia stayed, the more likely they were to accidentally reveal their issues. "Thank you so much for coming, Edna Petunia. You'll have to come back soon. But remember to let us know before you do," Catherine joked. Edna Petunia laughed. "You two are hilarious. I'll be back, don't you worry." Edna Petunia stood up. "Thank you again for a delicious dinner. And remember to take this young woman around to meet others her own age, Abner. Don't be selfish and hog her for yourself." "Yes, ma'am," Abner agreed. He walked Edna Petunia to the door, and Catherine followed. Edna Petunia hugged Catherine goodbye, then swatted her twice on each hip. Catherine stepped back, utterly confused. "What was that for?" "It's for good luck in baby making," Edna Petunia whispered loudly. "I can't wait to see the babies you two make. They'll be just beautiful." Catherine nodded, but she didn't really understand. Abner opened the door and allowed Edna Petunia to hug him as well. "Goodbye, Edna Petunia," Catherine called. Edna Petunia walked out the door and untied her horse from the post. Catherine and Abner waited patiently until Edna Petunia had disappeared from view. Then Abner shut the door and took a few steps toward the sofa. He collapsed onto it in a heap. Catherine followed suit. "I had a wonderful time, but I'm so glad she's gone," Catherine admitted. "Me too," Abner agreed. "I was so nervous that I was going to slip up again. Thank you for covering for me." "Of course," Catherine giggled. "I don't know how I thought of that so fast." "Well, it's true. You really have made a big difference around here," Abner told her, looking her right in the eyes. Catherine looked down, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing." Abner took Catherine's hand in his own. "It's not nothing, Catherine. You've really made this house a home. And I hope soon I can come back here and we can truly live together as man and wife." A tingle rippled up Catherine's arm and throughout her body. "I want that, too," she whispered. Abner leaned in closer. "When we're apart, you're all I can think about," Abner confided. Catherine's heart began to pound. "I feel the same way." She hadn't thought it would be possible when they'd first met, but in that short time, she'd already grown to care about him and consider his needs around the clock. Abner was inches away from Catherine's delicate face. He pressed forward, pushing his lips against hers. He kissed them gently, then more deliberately. Catherine thought her heart was going to leap out of her chest. She had never been kissed before, and it was an incredible feeling. Abner deepened the kiss, and she responded, feeling new sensations throughout her body. Abner couldn't stop kissing Catherine. He caressed her arms, wanting to go further and do more, but unsure of how far to push. He decided to keep kissing her for as long as she would allow. Catherine was running out of breath. She pushed Abner away, trying to catch it, but all she could do was giggle. "What's wrong?" Abner asked. "I need to catch my breath," Catherine said between spurts of laughter. Soon, Abner was laughing, too. "Should we move into the bedroom?" Catherine grew serious. "I'm not sure." "Oh." Abner hung his head sadly. Catherine tried to explain her feelings, but words failed her. "It's not that I don't, I just..." You just what? Abner genuinely wanted to understand. This is all new to me, Abner, Catherine said. It was impossible to take all of her feelings and express them in words. I should go, Abner said. If Catherine wasn't going to let him into their marital bed even after a wonderful evening and a passionate kiss, would she ever allow him in? Was all of this work pointless? Catherine bit her lip. She could tell Abner was upset, and she knew that she had hurt his feelings, but she needed a little more time. It had been a lovely evening, but Catherine wasn't sure if she was truly ready to consummate their marriage. She wanted to tell Abner all this, but nothing was coming out correctly. Instead, she walked him to the door. Good night, Abner. Good night, Catherine, Abner said stiffly. Thank you for a wonderful dinner. Catherine kissed him on his cheek. Abner simply nodded and exited the cabin. He began the trip back to Bagley, his mind replaying the events of the past few minutes. He had never felt more attracted to Catherine or more hopeful for their relationship, but then she had stopped things from going any further. What did that mean? Was there any hope for their marriage? Abner exhaled in frustration. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 8. Pass me that rope. Tom called to Abner. Abner yawned. He thought he had heard his name, but he wasn't sure. Abner! Tom yelled. Abner looked around. Tom was shouting something at him. Abner blinked and rubbed his eyes. He hadn't gotten more than an hour of sleep. He had tossed and turned all night, worrying about Catherine and their relationship. I asked for the rope. Tom called again, frustrated. What had gotten into Abner? Oh. Abner replied. He went over to the supply rack and picked up a coil of rope, then threw it up to Tom, who was propped against the side of the barn, doing repairs. About time. Tom remarked as he caught the rope. Huh? Abner scratched his head. Never mind, Tom replied. Abner couldn't wait until the workday was done so he could go back into his little cabin and collapse before dinner. He would take a long nap so he'd be fresh and well-rested before seeing Catherine again. After the strange way the previous evening had ended, he wanted to be ready for anything. The morning was dragging. The men were working on some damage that had been done to the barn in a recent storm, and the work was tedious and time-consuming. Abner hoped they'd be able to finish the repairs that day instead of stretching them into the next. He couldn't stop thinking about the kiss he'd shared with Catherine. It was both a beautiful and a painful memory for him. He had loved the feeling of kissing her and holding her against him. She fit perfectly into his arms, and she seemed to be enjoying herself, too. But then she had stopped things and said he shouldn't come into the bedroom with her. He had thought that was what they both wanted, but Catherine apparently had a different idea. He had asked her why, but she hadn't articulated her thoughts. Now he worried. Was she having second thoughts about their marriage? Did she want to leave nowhere, abandoning her husband and the vows they'd made to one another? Abner also worried that he'd done something to deserve this. Catherine was a wonderful woman and everything he'd ever wanted in a wife. It made him think that there was something wrong with him that made her want to keep her distance. Abner also knew that Catherine wasn't perfect either. She could be persnickety at times, but he could handle that as long as she was willing to be a willing partner in their marriage. Abner! Where's your head at today? Tom asked. Abner blinked. Tom had climbed down the ladder and was standing a few feet away from him. What? Tom shook his head. Whatever's going on with you, Abner, you really need to snap out of it. I don't want anyone getting hurt. Tom gestured to the group of men working on the barn. Many were up on ladders, hammering nails or passing supplies to each other. Abner nodded. Yes, sir. What did you need? I asked you for a wrench, Tom replied. Sorry, Abner said sheepishly. He handed Tom a farm wrench from the toolbox sitting next to him. Thanks, Tom said and climbed back up on the ladder. Dad. Timmy's sick. One of the McLean boys ran toward the ladder, crying for Tom. Tom descended. What's all this about? Mama was taking care of him, but then he got sick, and she's cleaning it up. But then Tommy got sick, too, minus. Tom sighed. Abner, take my place. I need to deal with this. Abner nodded. Tom handed him the rope and the farm wrench. Be careful. I always am, Abner replied. Felix took a break and joined Abner by the side of the barn. That storm really wrecked things around here. Are you as exhausted as I am? Abner nodded glumly. You look pretty upset, Felix remarked. Are things still difficult with Catherine? Yes, Abner replied. There was no use in hiding anything from Felix. He'd find out soon enough. It's gotten so bad that I'm living here in one of the cabins. Felix stared at Abner in disbelief. I had no idea it was that bad. I'm sorry, Thank you, Abner said earnestly. At least he knew that no matter what happened, he had Felix on his side. Felix picked up a piece of wood from a pile of debris. I guess we should get back to work. Do you want to go up the ladder, or do you want me to? Abner sighed. Doesn't matter to me. I can do it. He scrambled up the ladder, but his mind was completely focused on Catherine. Here you go. Felix handed Abner the piece of wood and his hammer, and Abner began nailing the board back into place. When was the last time you spoke to Catherine? Last night. Abner's eyes glazed as he remembered feeling Catherine's skin against his. It was wonderful. Well, what went wrong? Felix asked, confused. I don't quite know, Abner said honestly. It all happened so fast. Things were going well, and then I suggested something that I thought she wanted. Not long after that, she was showing me to the door. That's rough, Felix said sympathetically. Maybe she just needs a little time. That's what she keeps saying, Abner commented. But how much time does she need? We're already married. Felix shrugged. I'm not married, so I don't know the answer to that. He bent down and grabbed another board, then lifted it into the air. Abner bent down from his spot on the ladder and took the board from Felix. He nailed it into place. I hope you two work things out, Felix said. I do, too, Abner agreed. They worked in silence for a while as the morning dragged on. The pile of boards that needed to be put back onto the barn seemed endless. I reckon we'll be here for the next 2 days at least, Felix said. Abner groaned. I'm already bored. He preferred doing anything else to barn repairs. At least you have me and my sparkling personality to talk to, Felix told him. Abner laughed for the first time all day. He wished he felt as comfortable in front of Catherine as he did with Felix. With Catherine, he always felt pressure to do or say the right thing. She seemed to be very concerned with manners and etiquette, whereas Abner simply tried to be a good person. Before he knew it, his mood had soured as he thought about how strained his relationship with his wife was. Ah, cheer up, Abner. Felix called as he passed another board to him. I'm sure you two will stop fighting soon, then you'll probably have a dozen kids and forget all about me. I hope you're right. But I'd never forget about you, Felix. I couldn't if I tried. We worked together. Abner joked. He reached down for the board and began to lose his balance. Felix saw Abner swaying on top of the ladder and stretched his arms in the air. Do you need a hand? But it was too late. Abner's bottom foot slipped off the ladder, and he fell toward the ground, landing in a heap. Felix bent down toward Abner's face. Are you okay, Abner didn't respond. Felix felt Abner's wrist. His heart was still beating, and he was breathing normally. It seemed like he was fast asleep. Felix began to shout for help. He prayed that his best friend would be all right. Chapter 9. Catherine put the finishing touches on the casserole she had made for dinner and stood back to admire her work. Abner would be home any minute, and she hoped he'd like what she had prepared. It was one of his mother's recipes. She planned on apologizing for the events of the previous night. She had gotten scared and instead of expressing herself, she had upset Abner and caused him to leave. She vowed not to make the same mistake again. Suddenly, there was a pounding on the door. Catherine paused. "Abner, you don't have to knock." But the pounding only grew louder. Catherine walked to the door and opened it. To her surprise, Tom McLean stood there with a group of men behind him, all huddled in a circle. "Tom, what are you doing here?" Catherine asked, puzzled. "We need to get Abner inside, now." Tom rushed into the house. Catherine became frightened. "What are you talking about?" The men in a circle followed Tom inside. Catherine realized that they were carrying someone, a man. Her heart lurched. It was Abner. The men set Abner down on the sofa and propped his legs up. What happened? Catherine couldn't believe what was happening. "Will he be all right?" A young man with a plump face came up to Catherine. "It was my fault, Catherine. I'm Felix. Abner's best friend. We were working together, and I passed a board to him, and he lost his balance and fell." Another man approached Catherine solemnly. "We've sent for the doctor. We'll know more then." Catherine hurried to Abner's side, taking his hand in hers. Her head was spinning. Tom came over to speak with her. "I know this must be very scary, but I'm sure the doctor will arrive soon. Are you all right?" Catherine shook her head. "I'm not sure. We'll stay with you until the doctor comes," Tom said, and he sat down next to her. The other men crowded around Abner, propping him up and making sure he looked comfortable. Through it all, Abner didn't make a sound. Catherine's heart pounded. She had taken Abner for granted, and now he was badly injured. She prayed that he would wake up soon. There was a loud knock at the door, and Catherine stood up to answer it. A tall man with a doctor's bag stood at the door. "I'm Stephen Bennett, one of the town doctors. I understand Abner's been hurt." Catherine nodded her head and stepped aside to let Dr. Bennett in. Two women followed him. "Hi, I'm Hope Bennett." Dr. Bennett's wife, the first woman said. The other woman gave Catherine a big hug. "I'm Katie Cavett. Her sister." "I think you've met one of our other sisters, Penny," Hope added. It all started to make sense to Catherine. "You must be Edna Petunia's daughters." "That's right. Our adoptive mother is truly one of a kind," Katie said, eyes sparkling. "We came here to see how you're doing. I'm sure my husband will take care of Abner, but we're here to take care of you," Hope explained. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I don't need taking care of. I just want Abner to be well." "That's what we want, too," Katie said, taking Catherine's hand. "Please, let us help out. Would you like some tea?" Catherine sighed. Tea did sound lovely. "This is my house. I should be making tea for you." "Nonsense," Hope said. She put a kettle on as Katie guided Catherine to take a seat at the kitchen table. The women kept Catherine company as Dr. Bennett examined Abner. Every few moments, Catherine's eyes drifted over to Abner. She was so worried about him, she had lost her appetite. Hope and Katie encouraged her to drink her tea, but she could barely swallow. After what seemed like a very long time, the other men left, and Dr. Bennett came to the table to speak with Catherine. Hope and Katie stood up to give them privacy. "Please, tell me what's wrong with Abner," Catherine pleaded. Dr. Bennett sighed. "Abner hit his head pretty hard when he fell. I think he's going to be all right, but he hasn't opened his eyes yet." "What does that mean?" Catherine asked. Dr. Bennett shook his head. "It's nothing to worry about, but you'll need to watch him closely for the next few days. He should wake up soon, and when he does, you'll need to help him because he'll likely be a bit confused for a few days." "I see. Is there anything else I can do for him?" Catherine asked. Dr. Bennett nodded. "As soon as he wakes up, he should drink plenty of water and eat something. His body will need some nourishment." "I understand," Catherine replied, standing up. "I'll get started now." She would be ready with all of Abner's favorites as soon as he opened his eyes. "Would you like some help?" Katie asked. Catherine paused, unsure. "Please. It's why we came, Hope told her. Catherine realized it might be nice to have some companionship while she waited for Abner to wake up. All right. Dr. Bennet returned to Abner's side and monitored him while the women stayed in the kitchen. Catherine thought for a moment. I think soup would be nice once he wakes up. It will help to keep him hydrated. Good idea, Katie replied. She found a stock pot in the cupboard and pulled it out. Abner also loves cookies. I'll make a fresh batch, Catherine said. She was still worried about Abner, but she felt reassured that Dr. Bennet thought he'd make a full recovery. As she got the flour and the sugar from the pantry, Catherine remembered the casserole she'd prepared. Is anyone hungry for a green bean casserole? It's going to go to waste if you don't help me eat it. Dr. Bennet looked over at Catherine. That sounds delicious, but I don't want to trouble you. It's no trouble, Catherine replied. Katie and Hope nodded in agreement. Catherine got out 3 plates and scooped out a portion of the casserole for each of them. Aren't you going to eat? Katie asked. Catherine shook her head. I'm not hungry. I'll eat when Abner eats. You should eat something, Dr. Bennet said gently. But Catherine shook her head. I'll eat later. She placed all of the ingredients in a bowl and mixed them together. She kneaded the dough with her hands until it was smooth, then formed the cookies, placed them on a pan, and put them into the stove. Why don't you have a little soup? Katie suggested. Just a taste, Hope added. Catherine set her lips in a firm line. No, thank you. A few minutes later, the smell of freshly baked cookies wafted through the home. On the sofa, Abner's nose perked up. He blinked his eyes open, then rubbed them. Doc Bennet? What are you doing here? Catherine rushed to Abner's side. Oh, thank goodness. She knelt down and plastered a huge kiss on Abner's lips. Abner thought he must still be dreaming. He had never seen Catherine act so excited to see him, let alone kiss him in front of other people. Abner tried to talk, but his throat felt dry and scratchy. He coughed a few times and sniffed the air. Cookies? Catherine threw her head back and let out a loud laugh. You can have as many cookies as you want. Abner perked up at this. He felt so strange. What happened? Dr. Bennet walked over to Abner and put his hand on his forehead. You'll need to take it easy for a few days, Abner. You had a bad fall from a ladder at the McLean's property. Where am I now? Abner asked, looking around. Catherine looked at him nervously. You're in your home, Abner. Our home. Abner smiled. I don't think I've ever heard you call it that, he whispered to Catherine. He tried to sit up, but winced with pain. Catherine felt her heart flutter. She wanted nothing more than for Abner to be well again. Would you like something to eat? Maybe, Abner replied. I'm not sure if I can sit up, though. Dr. Bennet nodded. Just be very careful and take everything very slowly. You don't want to rush it. In a few days, you'll be as good as new. Okay, Abner agreed. Maybe I can sit at the table to try to eat something. Catherine shook her head. Absolutely not. I'll feed you. You stay put. Looks like you have a good nurse on your hands, Abner, Dr. Bennet said approvingly. We should get out of your hair and let you two have a little peace and rest. No more excitement, do you understand, Abner? Doctor's orders. Yes, sir, Abner said. Hope and Katie stood and followed Dr. Bennet to the door. They hugged Catherine goodbye and waited outside. Dr. Bennet took Catherine aside. Remember, rest and quiet. He may be a little confused for the next few days, and it's important to keep him calm and well rested. You think he'll be all right, doctor? Catherine asked anxiously. Dr. Bennet smiled. With you by his side, he'll be better than all right. Just make sure he doesn't try to do too much. That could extend his recovery. I understand. Thank you, Dr. Bennet. Catherine waved goodbye as Dr. Bennet exited the house. She closed the door and turned to Abner. Don't even think about moving. I'll be right back with some food for you. You must be starving. Abner nodded sleepily. His body ached with pain, but having Catherine fuss over him made him feel better. It reminded him of when he was younger and his parents would take extra special care of him when he was sick. He liked the feeling of being loved and cared for. Catherine prepared a bowl of soup and a few tiny bites of casserole and brought them over to Abner. How do you feel? I'm a little sore, Abner admitted. You poor thing, Catherine clucked. She propped his head up on a pillow and held the bowl of soup up to him. Do you think you can manage a few bites? Oh, yes, Abner said happily. His stomach was growling. Catherine fed him a few spoonfuls of soup, and Abner smiled. This is delicious. I'm glad you like it. Catherine felt her heart rate start to get back to normal. Oh, Abner, you really gave me a scare. Abner felt terrible. I'm so sorry, Catherine. What did I do wrong? Catherine looked at him, surprised, but then remembered what Dr. Bennett had said about Abner being confused for a few days. Oh, nothing, Abner. Just focus on eating something, and then you should probably go back to sleep. Whatever you say, Catherine, Abner agreed. Catherine helped Abner take a few more bites, then fluffed the pillows to make Abner more comfortable. She found a cozy blanket in the bedroom and covered him with it, tucking it in around the sides of the sofa. Get some rest, Abner. Thank you, Kath, Abner began to say, but he fell asleep in the middle of speaking. Catherine put the food away. She knew she should eat something, too, but she wasn't hungry. All she cared about was helping Abner recover. Although the house was clean, she paced around, straightening furniture and dusting all of their belongings. When there was truly nothing else to do, she kissed Abner goodnight and went into the makeshift bedroom. She left the curtains open in case Abner needed anything or called to her during the night. It took Catherine a long time to fall asleep. She felt guilty for all of the arguments she'd had with Abner over the past few days. In the end, all that mattered was that they had taken a vow of marriage. She resolved to start acting like the wife Abner truly deserved. In the morning, Catherine woke up to Abner calling for her. She jumped out of bed and raced to his side. Are you okay? Why am I on the sofa? Abner asked. What happened? Catherine smiled. You gave us all quite a fright, Abner. You fell. Do you remember that Dr. Bennett was here? Abner closed his eyes and tried to remember. I think I do. And you? You fed me soup. That's right. Catherine was glad he remembered the previous night. Surely that was a good sign. But the doctor said you'd be a little confused for a few days. He said if you rest and take it easy, you'll be back to normal in no time. Oh, that's good, Abner replied. I'm sure lucky to have you by my side. Catherine squeezed Abner's hand. Always. Abner had never seen Catherine act so loving before, and he quite enjoyed it. Would you like some breakfast? Catherine asked. Abner nodded eagerly. Catherine went to the cupboards, and Abner heard Catherine open the icebox and the sounds of jars being opened and closed. A little while later, Catherine brought 2 bowls over and handed one to Abner. Abner sniffed it cautiously. It didn't look like anything Catherine had ever made him before. What is this? It's musco, Catherine said brightly. Abner felt like kissing her, but it was too painful to move. Even the simple act of lifting the spoon from the bowl to his mouth hurt him. Thank you, he said gratefully. You're welcome. To his surprise, Catherine began to eat the musco eagerly. He tasted a few more bites. This is better than when I've made it. Catherine shrugged. I may have slipped in a few extra ingredients. Abner rested his eyes. You're so wonderful. Catherine put her hand on his arm. Abner, listen to me. You need to take it nice and easy, all right? I don't want another scare. I'm not going to allow you to go back to work until you're fully recovered. Abner sighed pleasantly. I understand. If it meant Catherine was taking such good care of him, Abner didn't mind a long recovery. In fact, he could get used to it. Chapter 10. Catherine walked carefully, carrying a plate of pasta, over to the sofa. Careful, it's hot. Abner smiled meekly up at her. Catherine tried to smile, but she was worried. It had been 2 weeks since Abner's fall, and his recovery was slower than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Bennett was on his way to check up on him. Tom had visited a few times and assured them that he would wait as long as it took for Abner to recover. Tom felt horrible about the accident, even though it hadn't been his fault and no one was to blame. He wanted to make sure Abner was fully healed when he returned to work. Catherine felt lucky that Abner had such an understanding employer. When she had worked at the factory, if girls had been injured or sick, they would lose their jobs immediately. None of the factory managers were as compassionate as the McLeans. She was also grateful that practically the whole town had helped out. Each morning, a different neighbor or friend would arrive with a hot meal or something to brighten their day. Katie Cavett had picked fresh flowers the day before, and Catherine had set them in a glass next to Abner so he'd have something cheery to look at as soon as he woke up each morning. Ruby Darcy had brought ice cream from the local shop. Edna Petunia had visited several times and left a growing pile of peppermint sticks on the table near the sofa. No one had touched them, but Catherine knew it was the thought that counted. Still, Catherine felt concerned that Abner hadn't progressed. Each evening, she asked Abner how he was feeling and if he felt ready to try new things, but he was still sleeping on the sofa and taking his meals there. Catherine had tried to get him to walk around the small home, but even that seemed too big of a chore for him. He'd needed her help just to get to the outhouse and back. Abner waited for the pasta to cool off, then tried a few bites. "This is delicious." Nearly every dish Catherine made was fantastic, but pasta with meatballs was quickly becoming one of his favorites. He wondered if he should try to walk around the room. He knew Catherine wanted him to, but he felt scared. Part of him was worried that his body wasn't ready and that he would collapse. But a bigger part of him worried that if he was fully recovered, Catherine wouldn't be as kind and loving to him. He knew he should talk to Catherine about it, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up. And in the meantime, Catherine was taking such good care of him. He thought he had better play it safe and keep resting. A little while later, Dr. Bennett arrived. Catherine washed dishes, while Dr. Bennett examined every inch of Abner. When he was finished, he asked Catherine if they could speak outside. Catherine walked outside with Dr. Bennett, her heart beating rapidly. Was something terribly wrong? Dr. Bennett frowned. As far as I can tell, there's nothing wrong with Abner. I'm not sure why he still is feeling so weak. All of the measurements I took are normal. I thought he'd be fully recovered by now. I thought that, too, Catherine replied. What should we do? I'm not sure. This is unusual, Dr. Bennett admitted. I didn't think we should push Abner before, but maybe he needs a little nudge. What do you mean? Catherine asked. A reminder of his normal life, what he's missing by staying in the house. Maybe he needs a goal to work for, Dr. Bennett explained. Catherine had an idea, but it wasn't polite to mention to Dr. Bennett. I think I understand. Dr. Bennett looked relieved. Catherine, you're a wonderful caretaker for Abner. I know he's not progressing as quickly as we'd like, but he's very lucky to have you. Thank you, Catherine replied. I just want my husband to be well. I want that, too, Dr. Bennett agreed. I think I'll leave now and give you some privacy again. But please send for me if you need anything else. Physically, Abner seems like he's fully healed. He probably just needs to build some confidence so he believes he's better. Catherine nodded. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I hope we'll see you at church this Sunday. Dr. Bennett was surprised by Catherine's positivity. I hope so, too. Good night. Dr. Bennett left, and Catherine went back inside. She knew exactly what she wanted to talk to Abner about, but it might be tricky to find the right words. You know, Abner, Catherine began, Dr. Bennett said something that worried me a little. Abner sat up on the sofa, alarmed. He was relieved to find that the action didn't hurt him anymore. What was that? He talked about how you aren't back to normal yet, Catherine said, hanging her head. And that made me realize. Realize what? Abner didn't understand what Catherine was trying to say. Until you're well again, there are certain things we can't do. And I wish we could do them, Catherine explained. Abner scratched his head. Was Catherine saying what he thought she was saying? Certain things. Like what? Catherine sighed. She still felt uncomfortable talking about it, but she was just going to have to get over it. Like sharing a bed, she said softly. It's too bad you still feel unwell. Abner's heart beat even faster. He wanted that more than anything. But he was scared. What if he couldn't even walk around the room? How could he perform his husbandly duties? Catherine sighed. It's all right, though. We'll wait as long as it takes you to recover. It just made me a little sad, that's all. Catherine stood up and returned to washing dishes. She hoped that what she had said might make Abner a little more motivated toward his recovery. Abner gulped. He was scared of trying to stand up, but he knew he owed it to Catherine to try. He took a few deep breaths. Catherine? Catherine turned around. Yes? I think I'm ready to try to walk around a little. Just a little, he added hastily. I don't want to hurt myself again. Catherine rushed to his side. Of course, Abner. We'll take it slow. Catherine bent down and helped Abner wrap his arms around her shoulders. Feeling his body so close to hers sent that tingling sensation through her body again. She remembered how it had felt kissing him. Although that evening felt like it was in the distant past, it had been 2 weeks since their passionate kiss. Since then, Catherine and Abner had hugged and even given each other light kisses, but there had been nothing more. Catherine longed to feel his touch again, but she knew she needed to be patient. Slowly, Catherine and Abner stood. How are you feeling? Okay, Abner replied. He took a few shaky steps and was pleased to find that they were comfortable. After a few steps, he felt tired again. I think I need a break. Catherine gingerly helped Abner back to the sofa. That was wonderful, Abner. Abner frowned. I grew tired so quickly. That's all right. You'll build up your endurance bit by bit, Catherine reassured him. I'm so proud of you. Abner smiled up at her. Thank you. You should rest up. We'll try again later, or tomorrow, Catherine instructed. Yes, ma'am, Abner agreed. Catherine tucked him back into his blanket and went back to finish doing the dishes. Although it had been a long journey, she had hoped that soon, her husband would be back to his normal, easygoing self. She could hardly wait. The following evening, Abner felt well enough to eat dinner at the table with Catherine. They ate a tuna casserole quietly. This is very good. Thank you, Abner told Catherine. It was simple, Catherine said. I wasn't sure what you'd want to eat since you've been feeling a bit better. I'm happy with anything you cook for me, you know that, Abner grinned. He would never complain about Catherine's cooking, because he had no intention of going back to his bachelor ways. Plus, her cooking was phenomenal. How does your head feel? Catherine inquired. It doesn't hurt at all anymore, Abner explained. The first few days after the fall, it hurt pretty badly. But now it doesn't give me any trouble. I'm glad to hear that, Catherine replied. Maybe tomorrow we could go for a walk outside. I think I'd like that, Abner agreed. He took a deep breath and took her hand in his. I could have never gotten through this without you, Catherine. To Abner's surprise, Catherine burst into tears. Bewildered, he handed her the handkerchief he always kept in his pocket. Catherine took it gratefully and sobbed into it. What's wrong? Abner asked. Oh, no. Am I using the wrong fork again? Just as suddenly as she had started crying, Catherine began to laugh. Abner was so confused that he joined her in laughter. No, that's not it, Abner. Not at all. Abner was flummoxed. Then what is it? Have I done something wrong? No, Abner. You've done nothing wrong. Catherine assured him. I just feel awful about how I acted when I first arrived. I behaved horribly. That's not true, Abner said. You were a bit demanding, but… Abner, I cared about things that were unimportant. I've realized that I don't want to worry about those types of things anymore, Catherine told him. They don't matter. All that really matters is that we're together. Abner felt a sense of relief wash over him. Everything Catherine was saying was exactly how he felt about her, too. All that matters is that we're together, Abner repeated. His lips twitched mischievously. So does that mean you don't care if I eat ice cream with a fork? Or a meatloaf with a spoon? Catherine giggled. Abner, you're awful. Just teasing you, my dear, Abner said. It certainly seems like you're feeling better, Catherine replied. Maybe you'll have more energy for other activities, too. I have a few ideas in mind, Abner said with a twinkle in his eyes. So do I, Catherine said, and they both burst into laughter again. Epilogue. Edna Petunia couldn't believe her eyes. Abner Phelps walked into the church proudly, good as new. In fact, he seemed even more handsome and confident than the last time she had seen him in church. That new wife had clearly been a blessing for him. Everyone swarmed around Abner, excited to see him out of the house. They were glad that he had made a full recovery. Are you ready to come back to work, too? Tom teased. I sure am, Tom, Abner replied. I want to set a good example for my family. He looked at Catherine, and they shared a private smile. They had had a long talk the night before about starting a family, and he couldn't wait until there were little ones running around their house. Of course, he had realized that he'd have to add on to it to make room for them, but that would all come with time. Just one rule, Abner, Tom said. What's that? Abner asked. Next time you're up on a ladder, we're not letting you be partnered with Felix. You're too good of friends, and it's too distracting, Tom decreed, giving Felix a pointed look. Felix sighed. I still feel bad about it, like it was partially my fault that you fell. It wasn't your fault, Felix. These things happen. The important thing is I'm back to normal, Abner replied. And thank you for the delicious pie your mother sent, Catherine added. Thank you all, really. She turned around, looking at the group that had gathered around them. They were so lucky to have such a supportive community. Micah Barton cleared his throat from the front of the church. It was louder than usual, people were laughing and catching up, not settling into their seats. He coughed, hoping everyone would settle down, but no one seemed to hear him. Jed Thorne put his hands in his mouth and whistled loudly. The talking came to a halt, and people turned to stare at him. Jed gestured at Micah. The man's trying to speak. Micah smiled gratefully at his brother-in-law. Everyone took their seats, and Micah began the service. Today is a special day in our church. We welcome one of our returning members, Abner Phelps. Abner was injured in an accident recently, but thanks to his incredible wife, Catherine, he's back with us today. Welcome back, Abner. Thanks, Pastor. Abner called, slipping his arm around his wife. Everyone laughed. Micah continued with the service. Catherine looked around the church. For as scared as she had been when she'd first moved to Nowhere, she now felt calm and at peace. The people of Nowhere had welcomed her with open arms, and now she counted many of them friends. Katie and Hope had visited her regularly during Abner's recovery. Now that Abner was about to return to work, Catherine had promised to visit them in their own homes, too. It seemed like most of the people she met were connected in some way to Edna Petunia and Cletus Sanders. The eccentric couple had been kind and generous during Abner's recovery, often visiting or sending one of their relatives with a hot meal. Catherine looked forward to getting to know them even better. Best of all was her relationship with Abner. Once she had let go of her preconceived notions of marriage, she and Abner had truly started to enjoy themselves. It didn't matter if the table was set perfectly or the quilts were folded neatly. All that mattered was that they were kind and true to one another. As Micah concluded the service, Abner squeezed Catherine's hand. They went outside, where people continued to come up to Abner and Catherine and tell them how happy they were to see them in church. Abner kissed Catherine on the cheek. I have to talk to Tom about something. Will you stay here? Catherine was confused, but nodded. That's fine. Abner walked off toward Tom, and the two men began to confer. Katie came up to Catherine and gave her a big hug. I'm so glad to see you. I'm glad to see you, too, Catherine agreed. It's a beautiful day. Yes, it is. I can't wait to have you and Abner over for dinner, Katie said. That sounds lovely. Catherine smiled. Her new friends were so thoughtful and kind. It's a relief to get back to normal. I can imagine, Katie replied. Just then, Catherine heard hoofbeats. Perplexed, she turned her head. Abner led a gorgeous chestnut-brown horse toward her at a brisk trot. When they were close enough, Catherine rubbed the beautiful horse on its neck softly. Who is this? Do you remember on the first day we met, you said you enjoyed horses? Abner asked. Catherine flushed. I had almost forgotten about that. To thank you for everything you've done in my recovery, I bought this horse from Tom. She's yours, Abner said, beaming. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She threw her arms around Abner. Oh, thank you, Abner. She's perfect. She stroked the horse's mane. I think I'll call her Chestnut. Horses had brought such joy to Catherine's childhood before the fire. She was so glad that Chestnut would be part of her new life in Nowhere with Abner. Edna Petunia came up to the horse and admired Chestnut's beauty. Well done, Abner. Looks like your bride is happy as can be. She deserves more than this, Abner replied. I owe everything to Catherine. Edna Petunia coughed. Aren't you forgetting someone? Catherine and Abner laughed. We both owe you as well, Edna Petunia. Catherine smiled. I never imagined I could be this happy, Abner remarked. All those years of chasing young women. Well, you can safely say those days are over. I should hope so. Catherine swatted at Abner playfully. Catherine was just happy that everything had worked out in the end. She knew she didn't have to worry about him anymore. I must say, you two have exceeded my expectations, Edna Petunia remarked. She had never imagined Abner looking as fine as he did today, and Catherine was practically bursting with joy. You're a regular matchmaker, Cletus agreed. I'm proud of you, honey. He kissed his wife on the lips. Katie rolled her eyes at Catherine, but Catherine thought it was sweet. She hoped that her and Abner's love would be that strong when they were that age. You really do have a knack for this, Edna Petunia, Abner said. We should start calling you Madame Matchmaker. Edna Petunia sighed, that has a nice ring to it.